Hi guys. Tonight we're walking into the cold, moonlit mountains where the potato first learned to become impossible to ignore. Imagine the Andes rising around you in shadowy walls of stone, the air so thin it feels like a silk thread slipping through your lungs, and the ground beneath your sandals chilled by frost. What kind of crop chooses this place to begin a world conquest? Not golden wheat, not dramatic grapes. No, of course not. It is a small, knobbly thing hiding underground, looking as if it has survived a minor argument with a pebble. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're getting comfortable, comment where you're watching from and what your local time is, because somewhere, someone else is drifting through history with you under a very different sky. Now, dim the lights, and you step softly into an ancient Andean night. You're standing thousands of meters above the sea, where the mountains seem less like scenery and more like sleeping giants. The wind moves slowly across the slopes, rubbing against tufts of ichu grass with a dry whisper. It smells of cold earth, smoke from distant hearths, and the faint animal warmth of llamas gathered behind low stone walls. The stars are startlingly bright. They do not glitter politely here. They blaze, almost nosy, as though they're peering down to check whether the humans have remembered how to survive. Beneath your feet, hidden in the dark soil, are early potatoes. They are not yet the smooth, obedient supermarket potatoes you may know. These are smaller, tougher, often bitter and wildly varied. Some are purple, some yellow, some red, some speckled like tiny sleeping birds' eggs. They belong to a family of plants that grew in the high Andes of South America, especially in what is now southern Peru and northwestern Bolivia, long before written records. Andean people began selecting and cultivating these tubers, learning which ones filled the belly, which ones stored well, and which ones needed careful treatment before they could be trusted. You crouch beside a farmer whose hands are cracked from cold and work. The soil is cool and crumbly under your fingers. When you pull at the plant, its roots resist for a moment, then release a cluster of tubers with a soft tearing sound. It is not glamorous. Nobody sings a trumpet fanfare for a potato. But in this landscape, glamour is less useful than reliability, and the potato has that quiet, stubborn talent. It can grow where maize struggles. It can tolerate thin air, poor soils, and sudden shifts between sun and frost. Up here, where the day may feel warm on your cheeks and the night may freeze water in a bowl, that talent is not charming. It is life. The earliest evidence for potato domestication is difficult to pin down with perfect confidence. Archaeologists have found ancient remains and traces of tubers in Andean sites, and many scholars place domestication several thousand years ago. Yet historians and scientists still debate exactly where the first cultivated potatoes emerged, whether in one central region or through several overlapping experiments by different highland communities. The potato, apparently, refuses to provide a tidy origin story, very on brand for a crop that grows underground. Around you, the village is quiet but not empty. Someone coughs inside a house made of stone and packed earth. A baby murmurs, a dog shifts and settles again. The roofs are low, the doorways small, conserving heat as carefully as a secret. Near a hearth, potatoes roast in ash, their skins blackening and cracking. The smell is simple and deep, earthy sweetness mixed with smoke. When one is lifted out and broken open, steam rises like a pale ghost. You feel the heat against your fingertips before the inside cools enough to eat. The texture is dense, comforting, almost creamy. There is a reason this crop will travel across oceans one day, but for now it belongs here, to these slopes, to these hands, to this breath of frost. In the Andean world, farming is not merely a matter of planting and waiting. That would be adorable and completely unrealistic. You watch people read the land with careful attention. They notice which slope catches the morning sun, where frost lingers, where water drains too quickly, where alpaca dung can enrich the soil. They do not farm one neat field of one neat crop. They cultivate difference. Many varieties are planted across different elevations and microclimates, so that if hail damages one place or frost bites another, something may still survive. This is not inefficiency. It is insurance, written in living plants. A mainstream fact sits quietly inside this scene. Potatoes became one of the foundational crops of the Andean highlands, alongside maize and quinoa in broader regional food systems. But unlike maize, which often preferred warmer valleys, potatoes were masters of the cold heights. They fed households, supported exchange, and eventually helped sustain complex societies. Their importance was not only nutritional, it was social. A potato harvest meant labour shared between families, storage planned with care, meals stretched through lean seasons, and offerings made to powers felt in mountain, rain, soil, and sky. You notice that the people do not treat the earth as an inert thing. The ground is alive with obligation. There are rituals, gestures, small acts of respect. A little food may be offered back. Words may be spoken softly. The mountains, known in many Andean traditions as powerful beings, are not background. They are neighbours of a very intimidating kind. You would not want to annoy a mountain. It has excellent posture and endless patience. One quirky tidbit awaits among the many potato varieties. Some wild and early cultivated potatoes contained bitter compounds that could make them unpleasant, or even unsafe if eaten carelessly. Andean communities developed ways to handle this, including processing methods that transformed certain bitter potatoes into edible food. It is one of those humble human achievements that rarely gets a statue figuring out how not to be defeated by dinner. As dawn begins to loosen the black sky, the fields take shape in shades of blue and grey. Terraces curve along the slopes, catching soil that would otherwise slide away. Frost glitters on leaves. A llama bell clinks somewhere behind you, soft and irregular, as if the morning is still deciding whether to wake. Your breath clouds in front of your face. The potato plants look modest, almost shy, with leaves close to the ground and flowers that can be pale, purple, white, or blue, depending on the variety. Above the soil, they seem ordinary. Below it, they are quietly making history. You walk between the rows and feel the uneven ground through your soles. The air is thin enough to make every movement deliberate. You begin to understand that the potato's first great gift was not abundance in the easy sense. It was resilience. It allowed people to live more securely in a landscape that demanded respect. It turned cold nights and steep slopes into possibilities. It gave calories, comfort, and a kind of edible patience. And because you're here in the beginning, before ships, kings, famines, factories, and fast food, you can see the potato without all the noise that will later gather around it. It is not yet a global commodity. It is not yet a political crop. It is not yet mashed beside gravy, fried in oil, sliced into packets, or argued over by people who take side dishes far too seriously. It is simply a mountain food, lifted from dark soil by careful hands. The first light touches the peaks. Smoke rises from homes, somewhere. A woman laughs quietly as a stubborn tuber refuses to come loose, and someone else makes the kind of comment that has probably existed since farming began. The field is always easier in someone else's story. You hold a potato in your palm. Its skin is cool, slightly rough, dusted with earth. It weighs almost nothing, and yet, in time, it will help change the weight of the world. The night has hardened into silver frost, and you stand on a high Andean plain where the cold feels almost alive. It slips under your woven cloak, touches your wrists, and settles on your cheeks with a patient little sting. Above you, the sky is dark and enormous, crowded with stars so clear they seem close enough to trouble with a stick. Underfoot, the earth is stiff. Beside you lie rows of potatoes spread across open ground. Not forgotten, not abandoned, but deliberately offered to the freezing air. This is the making of chunyo, one of the most ingenious foods in human history, though it begins in a way that looks suspiciously like someone left dinner outside by mistake. The potatoes rest beneath the stars until the night cold freezes them solid. By morning, when sunlight returns to the heights, the frozen tubers begin to thaw. People gather, speaking softly, their breath blooming white in the air. Then comes the part that might make a modern kitchen inspector raise one careful eyebrow. The potatoes are pressed underfoot. You watch as families step across them, squeezing out moisture with bare feet or sandals. The sound is soft and damp, a muted squish against the ground. It is not elegant, but elegance is often useless at high altitude. Practicality is the real aristocrat here. The repeated freezing, thawing, and pressing removes water and helps reduce bitterness in certain varieties. Over several nights and days, the potato changes from a fresh tuber into a pale, dry, lightweight food that can be stored for years. Chunyo is not just preserved potato. It is cold weather turned into technology. The smell around you is sharp and clean, a blend of icy soil, crushed vegetation, wool clothing, and smoke drifting from cooking fires. Llamas shuffle nearby, their padded feet making almost no sound. A child lays when one of the animals snorts dramatically, as if personally offended by the existence of mourning. The adults keep working. Their hands are used to this rhythm's spread, freeze, thaw, press, dry. The motion is repetitive, but not dull. It carries the quiet confidence of knowledge passed through many generations. A mainstream historical fact rests at the heart of this practice. Andean peoples developed freeze-drying long before modern laboratories gave it a tidy scientific name. By using the natural cycle of freezing nights and sunny days, they preserved potatoes in a form that could endure long storage and difficult transport. In a region where harvest could be threatened by frost, hail, drought, or political demands from powerful rulers, preserved food mattered deeply. A fresh potato feeds you now. Chunyo feeds you when the field is sleeping, when roads are long, when luck has wandered off in a rude little mood. You kneel and pick up one of the drying tubers. It feels wrinkled and light, almost like a small stone made of chalky skin. Its surface is cold at first, then slowly warms against your palm. This transformation is strange because the potato seems to lose its softness and yet gain power. It becomes less like a vegetable and more like a promise. Stored in the right conditions, chunyo can last for astonishing lengths of time. It can be carried across mountain paths, traded between communities, added to soups, ground into flour, or revived in water. There is also a darker cousin, often called black chunyo, made through exposure to frost and sunlight, while white chunyo, known in some regions as tunta or maraya, may involve soaking in running water. Local names and methods vary, because the Andes are not one simple postcard of mountains and ponchos. Thank you very much. They're a vast world of languages, elevations, climates, and traditions. A technique may look similar from far away, but up close it carries local habits, local preferences, and local memory. One quirky tidbit is that chunyo was sometimes so durable and portable that it became useful not only in village kitchens but in systems of taxation and state storage. Imagine paying obligations partly in freeze-dried potatoes. It sounds humble, perhaps even funny, until you remember that a food able to survive years in storage can be more valuable than a shiny ornament when the weather turns hostile. Gold may impress the eye. Chunyo politely keeps people alive. Honestly, gold should try being useful once in a while. You follow a woman toward a low storage space where dried tubers are gathered in sacks and baskets. The air inside is dim, cool, and dry. It smells faintly dusty, like old earth and woven grass. When she pours a handful into a container, the pieces click softly against one another. They do not sound like fresh food. They sound like pebbles from a riverbed. yet when simmered slowly with meat, herbs, or other crops, they soften and thicken the pot, giving body to soups and stews. You can almost hear the future meal bubbling, the quiet pop of broth, the scrape of a wooden spoon, the sigh of someone warming their hands near the hearth. Scholars still argue about how old some chuno-making traditions are in their fully developed form. The basic relationship between potatoes, frost, drying, and preservation is ancient, but tracing the exact timeline is difficult because tubers do not always preserve neatly in the archaeological record. The Andes keep many secrets in dry caves, old middens, and highland soils, but they do not label them for our convenience, very inconsiderate of the past. Really, the process also reveals something gentle and profound about human adaptation. People here did not merely endure a harsh environment, they learned its habits and made them useful. Freezing nights became tools. Strong sunlight became a partner. The thin, dry air became part of the pantry. Instead of fighting the mountains at every turn, communities listened closely, then invented a food that belonged perfectly to the place. As afternoon fades, the plain glows with a tired amber light. The potatoes lie scattered across the ground, slowly losing their last traces of moisture. The wind moves over them with a papery whisper. You feel the rough weave of cloth at your shoulders, the ache of cold in your fingers, the steady pull of hunger beginning to wake. Somewhere, a pot is being prepared. Somewhere, dried potatoes will meet water again, swelling into nourishment. And in that quiet cycle, freeze and thaw, pressure and patience, loss and return, you sense why this little crop could become more than food. In Chunyo, the potato becomes time-made edible. It waits without complaint, which is more than can be said for most of us when dinner is late. It holds the memory of frost, footsteps, sunlight, and careful hands, ready to soften when needed, ready to feed a household when the mountain night closes in. You climb a stone path in the cool morning, following a line of terraces that seem to hold the mountains in place with quiet determination. Each level curves along the slope, built from fitted stones and packed soil, catching sunlight, water, and possibility. Mist drifts below you in the valley like a pale blanket someone forgot to fold. The air smells of damp earth, llama wool, wood smoke, and the faint green sharpness of potato leaves brushed by dew. The Inca world rises around you, not as a single city or a simple kingdom, but as a vast highland system stitched together by roads, labour, storehouses, messengers, rituals, and fields. Potatoes are everywhere in this landscape, tucked into terraced plots, carried in woven bags, simmered in clay pots, counted as provisions, and stored for seasons of need. They do not glitter like temple gold, but they are far more useful when stomachs begin making rude little speeches. You pause beside a farmer guiding a footplough into the soil. The tool, often called a shakitakala, is worked with body weight, patience, and a rhythm that looks almost like a slow dance. The farmer presses down, lifts, turns the earth, and moves again. Others follow, placing seed potatoes into opened ground. Their fingers are quick and practiced. The soil feels cold when you touch it, but not lifeless. It is dark, crumbly, mixed with manure, bits of straw, and the memory of many harvests. A mainstream historical fact sits firmly beneath your feet. The Inca Empire, known as Tawantinsuyu, depended on intensive agriculture and state organization to support millions of people across difficult terrain. Potatoes, along with maize, quinoa, beans, and camelid herding, helped sustain communities from high plateaus to steep valleys. The empire used terraces, irrigation works, and storage facilities to manage food in an environment where altitude could change farming conditions within a short walk. You continue upward, and the terraces change subtly. Some face morning light, others hold warmth later in the day. Water channels guide meltwater and rain where it is needed. Small walls reduce erosion and create pockets of growing space. You realize that this is not random mountain gardening. It is a patient architecture of survival. The terraces make the hillside behave, or at least behave a little better. Mountains are never fully obedient. They merely tolerate human plans when properly flattered. In the distance, a runner appears along the road. He moves with astonishing steadiness, sandals slapping softly against stone, breath controlled, a small pouch at his side. Inca messengers, often called shaski, carried information across the road network in relays. You hear the faint call that announces his arrival at a station. Food makes such movement possible. A messenger cannot run on imperial confidence alone. However inspiring the officials may think their speeches are, he needs stored provisions, reliable meals, and communities able to produce surplus. Near a cluster of buildings, you enter a storage area. The air is cool and dry, with a mineral smell from stone walls and a dusty sweetness from stored crops. Rows of storehouses, known as kolkas, are placed where wind and temperature help preserve supplies. Inside, food may be held in baskets, bins or bundles. Dried potatoes, maize, textiles, and other goods become part of a state system that can feed workers, soldiers, nobles, and people facing hardship. You hear the dry rustle of fibre sacks and the clicking sound of preserved tubers poured into a container. One quirky tidbit is that some Inca storehouses were designed with ventilation features so carefully placed that natural air movement helped keep goods dry. It is ancient climate control, without buttons, screens, or anyone pretending the thermostat is not their fault. In a highland world of cold nights and strong sun, storage was a science wrapped in stone and habit. The potato, especially when dried, fit beautifully into this system because it could be counted, carried, stored, and revived in the cooking pot. You walk through a household courtyard as midday warmth spreads across the stones. A woman rinses potatoes in a shallow vessel, her hands moving through cold water with quick splashes. Nearby, a child sorts tubers by size and colour, occasionally becoming distracted by the serious business of poking one that looks like a tiny face. The smell of boiling food rises from a clay pot. Steam carries the scent of starch, herbs, and smoke. A dog lies near the hearth, pretending not to care while caring very deeply. Potatoes here are not only calories, they are woven into labour obligations, kinship, ritual, and seasonal time. Planting and harvest involve cooperation. Families work together, and communities organise fields in ways shaped by local custom and state demands. The Inca system of labour service, often called mita, could require people to work on roads, terraces, mines, armies, or state lands. Food from those lands supported the machinery of empire, which sounds grand until you remember that someone still had to bend over in the cold and pull tubers from the mud. There is scholarly uncertainty in this world of order. Researchers continue to debate how much everyday farming was directed by imperial administrators and how much remained under local community control. The Inca state was powerful, certainly, but mountain villages had deep agricultural traditions of their own. Some fields served rulers, some served temples, some served families, and the exact balance may have shifted from region to region. The record gives clues, not a neat instruction manual. History enjoys making us work for our dinner. As afternoon light leans across the terraces, you notice the variety of potatoes drying near a wall. They are not uniform. They look like a family reunion where everyone is related but nobody agrees on the dress code. Some are long and curved, some are round and dark, some have skins like mottled sunset. This diversity protects against risk. A frost that harms one kind may spare another. A pest that prefers one variety may ignore a second. The field is a living library, and each tuber is a page written in colour, shape, taste, and endurance. The mountains grow quiet toward evening. Workers return along paths edged with grass. A cold breeze rises from the valley and presses against your face. Somewhere, a flute begins to play, thin and gentle, joined by the soft thump of footsteps and the low murmur of conversation. You sit near the warmth of a hearth as potatoes cook slowly under ash. Their skins crack, their insides soften. The first bite is plain, warm, and deeply comforting. In the hush of the highlands, you feel how a hidden crop helps hold a visible empire together. Roads may impress the eye, stone walls may endure for centuries, rulers may claim descent from the sun and expect everyone to be appropriately amazed. But beneath the ceremony, beneath the roads and storehouses and commands, there is the small tuber in dark soil, multiplying quietly, waiting for hands to lift it into the light. You stand on the edge of a mining camp where the mountains no longer feel like sleeping giants, but like wounded ones. The air is thinner here, sharpened by dust, sweat, cold stone, and the metallic tang of silver ore. Men move through the highland pyres with burdens on their backs. Hooves strike rock. Voices rise in Spanish, Quechua, Aymara, and other tongues, sometimes bargaining, sometimes commanding, sometimes simply trying to be heard above the scrape of tools and the cough of wind. Into this uneasy world comes the potato's first strange encounter with Europe. Spanish conquistadors and colonists, hungry for gold, silver, souls, labour, titles, and probably a decent meal, notice the tuber because everyone around them already depends on it. It appears in markets, in workers' rations, in household pots, in baskets carried across brutal distances. At first, it does not look like a treasure. It is lumpy, earthy, and not especially persuasive. A potato does not announce itself with royal posture. It waits in silence, which, frankly, is a much better strategy than many conquerors managed. You walk through a crowded market in a highland town. The ground is packed hard beneath your feet. Women sit beside blankets spread with tubers of different colours and shapes. There are small purple potatoes, pale yellow potatoes, red potatoes with rough skins, long potatoes that curl slightly like sleeping fingers. Nearby are maize, peppers, coca leaves, beans, gourds, woven cloth, and clay vessels. Smoke from cooking fires drifts low, carrying the smell of toasted grain, boiling stew, wool, animals, and damp earth. A Spanish soldier pauses near a pile of potatoes and frowns. You can almost hear the thought forming behind his tired eyes. This is what people eat here. He has crossed oceans, marched through strange terrain, and witnessed cities and temples beyond anything he expected. And now he's being asked to respect a muddy underground lump. History is full of such little humiliations. The unfamiliar often arrives without manners. A mainstream historical fact is clear enough. Spaniards encountered the potato in the Andean region during the 16th century and eventually carried it across the Atlantic to Europe. It was not instantly celebrated. It moved through imperial routes slowly, mixed with other American plants, animals, minerals, and stories. Potatoes likely travelled first as provisions, curiosities, or botanical specimens, rather than as the adored dinner staple they would become. Europe did not open its arms to the potato. It squinted at it suspiciously from across the room. You follow a mule train descending from the heights. Bags are tied with rope, leather creaks, and the animals breathe heavily in the cold air. A few potatoes may be among the supplies, chosen not because they are glamorous, but because they are practical. They feed workers. They can be boiled, roasted, dried, and carried. In mining zones, especially around the great silver centre of Potosi, potatoes and chuño formed part of the food system that sustained indigenous labourers and colonial operations. Silver may have filled imperial chests, but food kept bodies moving through the daily grind. The sounds around you are restless hammering, muttering, hooves slipping on stone, the distant rumble of carts, the crackle of a cooking fire. You touch a potato pulled from a woven sack. Its skin is cool and gritty. It has travelled badly, bruised in places, but it is still food. That is one of the potato's quiet gifts. It can be ugly and useful at the same time, which is a very underrated combination. In Spanish records, the potato appears slowly, sometimes with uncertain descriptions and names that reflected confusion. Europeans often struggled to classify New World plants. Was this tuber like a truffle, a root, a kind of earth chestnut, a strange relative of something already known? Early descriptions could be vague, because observers were not always botanists, and even botanists were trying to fit unfamiliar life into familiar categories. The potato entered European awareness not as a dramatic hero, but as a botanical question mark with dirt on it. One quirky tidbit is that the word potato itself became tangled with another American crop, the sweet potato. In several European languages, names overlapped, shifted, or caused confusion. Sweet potatoes reached Europe earlier through Caribbean and tropical Atlantic routes, and for a while, the identities of these tubers blurred in writing and speech. Imagine trying to explain global agriculture while everyone keeps calling two different vegetables by nearly the same name. The potato was not only crossing oceans, it was fighting a branding problem. You move toward a port on the Pacific coast, where ships creak at anchor and seabirds cry overhead. The smell changes completely. Gone is the icy breath of the highlands. Here there is salt, tar, fish, wet rope, human sweat, and damp wood. Cargo is inspected, loaded, shifted, and argued over. Silver receives attention, of course. So do textiles, foodstuffs, and supplies. A few tubers placed aboard a ship do not look like a turning point in world history. They look like lunch, or maybe an experiment someone forgot to label. Historians still argue about the exact routes and dates by which the potato first arrived in Europe. Some evidence points towards Spain in the later 16th century, with movement through the Canary Islands and the Iberian world. Other clues suggest that potatoes may have reached different European places through multiple channels, including ships, gardens, soldiers, clerics, and traders. The records are patchy, the names are slippery, and the tubers themselves did not leave little passports. The result is a puzzle with soil under its fingernails. On the voyage, the potato faces a different kind of trial. Ships are damp, cramped, and foul-smelling. Wood groans. Water slaps the hull. Men sleep close together in stale air. Food spoils. Rats behave as though they purchased tickets. A potato stored poorly can rot, sprout, or be eaten before it reaches land, yet some survive. Perhaps they are carried as provisions, perhaps as curiosities for gardens, perhaps as odd American plants worth showing to men who enjoy Latin names and serious eyebrows. You imagine the first European hands lifting an Andean potato on foreign soil. The climate is different, the farms are different, the assumptions are very different. In parts of Europe, people are used to grains as the backbone of food wheat. Rye, barley, oats. Bread is not just food. It is culture, ritual, rent, labour, and comfort. An underground tuber from distant mountains does not easily enter that world. It lacks the dignity of bread, at least in the eyes of people who have not yet been hungry enough to reconsider dignity. The potato's first crossing is not a triumphal parade. It is a quiet transfer, almost accidental, carried inside an empire built for other ambitions. The Spaniards came seeking metals, territory, and power. They took many things and broke many others. Yet among the cargoes moving through conquest was a crop that would one day feed millions far from its birthplace. As evening settles over the port, you hear gulls fading into the wind and sailors calling from the deck. A sack shifts in the hold. Somewhere inside it, a few potatoes rest in darkness, still smelling faintly of the earth where they began. They do not know they are leaving the mountains. They do not know they will be feared, praised, painted, planted, taxed, fried, blamed, and adored. They simply wait, patient as always, while the sea begins to move beneath them. You enter Europe through a damp garden at the edge of a 16th century town, where the potato has arrived with soil still clinging to its reputation. The air is cool and heavy. Rain has softened the path, and your shoes press into mud with a faint sucking sound. Nearby, church bells move through the mist, slow and solemn, while smoke from chimneys curls low over thatched roofs. The garden smells of wet leaves, manure, clay, and the sharp green odour of unfamiliar plants brought from distant lands. There, behind a low fence, the potato grows awkwardly in the European imagination. Its leaves are not especially grand. Its flowers can be pretty, yes, but the edible part hides underground like it is avoiding polite society. This is a problem in a world where people already have strong feelings about what belongs on the table. Bread is familiar, porridge is familiar, turnips, cabbages, peas, beans, and onions know how to behave. The potato is the strange newcomer from overseas, and many people look at it as though it has arrived late, uninvited, and possibly carrying opinions. You stand beside a gardener who lifts the plant and studies the tubers with suspicion. They look rough, knotted, and pale under the wet sky. A few cling together in a cluster. He turns one over in his palm. It is cool, damp, and slightly gritty. You can almost feel his uncertainty. Should this thing be eaten, fed to animals, displayed to curious scholars, buried again and quietly ignored? Early European reactions varied widely, but suspicion was common. People often distrust what does not fit neatly into old categories, especially when it comes out of the dirt looking like a tired fist. A mainstream historical fact is that the potato did not become an immediate staple in Europe. Although introduced from the Americas in the late 16th century, it spread unevenly and slowly. In many regions, it was first grown in botanical gardens, aristocratic collections, or experimental plots rather than embraced by ordinary households. Its rise depended on local conditions, population pressure, warfare, famine, official encouragement, and changing habits. In other words, Europe did not simply taste a potato and fall in love. Europe made the potato wait in the hallway. Part of the problem was botanical family drama. The potato belongs to the nightshade family, which also includes poisonous plants known in Europe, such as deadly nightshade. The leaves, stems, and green parts of the potato plant can contain toxic compounds, and the tubers themselves may become unsafe when greened by light. This did not help its public relations campaign. Imagine introducing yourself at a village feast and having people whisper, "Isn't your cousin deadly awkward?" Very awkward. You move through a village kitchen, low-ceilinged and smoky. A woman stirs a pot over the fire, and the smell of cabbage, onions, and grain fills the room. The floor is packed earth. The wooden table is worn smooth by years of hands and dough. A few potatoes sit near the door, not yet trusted enough to be included. They have the lonely look of guests nobody knows where to seat. The family may have heard rumours potatoes cause illness. Potatoes encourage laziness. Potatoes are fit only for pigs. Potatoes are strange because they are not mentioned in the Bible. That last point carried real weight for some people. If a food had no familiar place in sacred or traditional frameworks, it could feel suspect. One quirky tidbit is that in some parts of Europe, potatoes were accused of causing leprosy or other diseases because their rough skins were thought to resemble afflicted human skin. This was not science, but resemblance had power in older ways of thinking. If something looked diseased, perhaps it produced disease. By that logic, walnuts would be excellent philosophers because they look faintly like brains, which, to be fair, did become a belief in some traditions. People have always been creative when wrong. It is one of our most durable talents. You walk into a physician's study, where herbs hang from beams and books sit open on a table. The room smells of dried lavender, ink, wax, and dust. A learned man writes notes about foreign plants, trying to decide their virtues and dangers. He may classify the potato cautiously, perhaps as nourishing, perhaps as crude, perhaps as suitable for certain bodies and not others. Medical thought in early modern Europe was still shaped by ideas of humours, balance, heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. Foods were judged not only by taste, but by their supposed effect on the body's internal harmony. The potato, bland and moist, did not always receive flattering reviews. Historians still debate how much early resistance to potatoes came from genuine fear, how much came from simple conservatism, and how much came from the practical difficulty of changing farming and cooking systems. Some stories of widespread terror may have been exaggerated later by promoters who wanted to dramatize their own success. Yet the hesitation was real enough in many places. The potato was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar foods must pass through the difficult court of habit. Habit is a stern judge. It wears old shoes and dislikes surprises. Outside, fields stretch in strips beyond the village. Grain dominates the landscape. Wheat and rye sway where soil and climate permit. Oats and barley appear in colder or poorer places. Farmers measure risk carefully. A failed crop can mean hunger, debt, or death. Planting a mysterious tuber instead of known grain is not a charming experiment when your children need food. You feel the roughness of a wooden fence beneath your fingers and hear the creak of a cart rolling over stones. Every acre matters. Every seed matters. The potato may be useful, but usefulness must prove itself season after season. In some regions, it begins humbly as animal feed. Pigs accept what people hesitate to eat, because pigs are not known for delicate theological objections. Livestock can turn suspicion into meat, and that offers one path toward acceptance. Elsewhere, soldiers, prisoners, or the poor may be given potatoes before wealthier households embrace them. This pattern repeats often in food history, the desperate test what the comfortable later rename as rustic cuisine. Still, the potato has advantages that cannot be ignored forever. It produces a large amount of food from a small area. It grows underground, where armies trampling fields may not immediately destroy the harvest. It can succeed in soils where grain is disappointing. It fills the stomach warmly. These qualities wait beneath the prejudice, patient and practical. The potato is not offended by slow acceptance. It has survived frost, altitude, and ocean crossings. A few suspicious villagers are hardly going to ruin its afternoon. Evening darkens the garden. Rain taps the leaves. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts in its stall, and a child complains softly about supper, continuing a proud human tradition older than agriculture itself. The gardener places the tuber back into a basket. He's not convinced, not yet, but he does not throw it away. That small hesitation matters. Curiosity remains. Hunger remains. Experiments continue in quiet corners. You look at the potato resting in the dim light, humble and misunderstood. It has entered a continent that does not yet know what to do with it. For now, it is a curiosity, a worry, a rumour with roots. But under the mud and suspicion, it carries an answer. Europe will eventually need food that grows hidden, stores well enough, and gives more than its appearance promises. The ugly little stranger waits, and Europe, though it would never admit it aloud, is already beginning to listen. You step into the hush of a monastery garden, where the morning is cool, damp, and patient. Stone walls hold the pale light. Bees drift around herbs with the slow confidence of creatures who do not care about theology, politics, or agricultural anxiety. Gravel crunches gently beneath your shoes. The air smells of rosemary, wet soil, lavender, wax from the chapel, and the faint sourness of compost tucked neatly behind a wall. Somewhere inside, a bell rings once, then again, spreading its bronze sound through the cloister. Here, the potato is not yet a peasant staple or a beloved supper. It is a specimen, a curiosity, a foreign plant invited into orderly beds beside medicinal herbs, cabbages, beans, and flowers with Latin names that make scholars feel pleasantly important. Monks, physicians, noble collectors, and botanists examine it with careful interest. They watch the leaves, flowers, berries, and tubers. They sketch, they compare. They argue quietly, because even plant classification can become a battlefield when enough educated men are given ink. You walk beside a monk whose robe brushes against the path with a soft rasp. His fingers are stained from soil and ink. He pauses at a patch of potato plants and bends to inspect the blossoms. They are delicate, almost surprising, pale purple and white against the green. Above ground, the plant is more graceful than people expect. Below ground, of course, it is still making its strange little treasure in darkness. The monk lifts one plant gently, not as a farmer desperate for supper, but as a keeper of knowledge asking what this newcomer might become. A mainstream historical fact is that potatoes were grown in European botanical gardens and learned settings before they became common field crops. In the 16th and 17th centuries, plants from the Americas entered collections across Europe, where they were studied for medicine, food, beauty, and prestige. To possess rare plants was to hold a piece of the wider world. A garden could become a quiet map of empire, trade, curiosity, and ambition, all arranged in tidy rectangles and watered by someone else. You enter a small study beside the garden. The room is narrow, with shelves of books, bundles of dried plants, and glass vessels catching the light. It smells of parchment, ink, dust, and pressed leaves. A potato plant lies on the table, roots exposed. The tubers are cleaned of soil and placed beside a quill. Someone has written notes about its growth, perhaps its taste, perhaps its suspected virtues. The handwriting is careful, but not always helpful. Early descriptions of the potato often overlap with other tubers, and names wander from page to page like absent-minded sheep. One quirky tidbit is that some Europeans admired the potato plant more for its flowers than its food. The blossoms could be treated as ornamental, fit for gardens and even fashionable display. Imagine a plant capable of feeding a village being welcomed first because it looked charming beside a path. Very human, really. We do enjoy noticing the decorative part of a miracle before the useful one. Outside, the beds are divided with string lines and low borders. You feel the dampness of the morning settle into your sleeves. A gardener carries a wooden bucket, water sloshing softly inside it. Nearby, another man kneels to loosen soil around the plants. The texture is heavier than Andean soil, more clay-rich in places, and it clings stubbornly to the tool. The potato must learn new weather, new pests, new habits of cultivation. It grows, but not always easily. Some varieties brought from South America may have struggled with European day lengths and climates. Adaptation took time, selection, accidents, and many unglamorous failures. In noble gardens, the potato can also become a conversation piece. You stand near a manor house where clipped hedges frame beds of exotic plants. Guests stroll slowly, pretending not to be cold while praising the owner's taste. A servant points out the strange American tuber. Someone laughs. Someone asks whether it is poisonous. Someone else claims to have heard that it is nourishing, although probably best suited to the lower orders, because snobbery has an amazing ability to survive contact with reality. The potato listens politely from the soil and continues growing. Scholars still argue over how quickly practical knowledge moved from gardens into fields, and how much credit belongs to elite experimenters compared with ordinary farmers quietly testing the crop on their own. Written records often preserve the voices of educated men, landlords, and officials, while the small trials of rural households leave fewer traces. A peasant who plants a few tubers behind a shed may change history, but unless someone writes it down, the archive shrugs and goes back to preserving official paperwork. In a monastery kitchen, you find the atmosphere warmer, steam pearls on the walls, a cook stirs a pot while another worker brushes mud from roots and vegetables. The fire crackles, sending sparks into the dark chimney. A few potatoes are boiled experimentally. Their smell is mild, earthy, not dramatic. When cut open, they release heat in soft white clouds. Someone tastes a piece and pauses. It is plain, yes, but filling. It accepts salt, butter, herbs, broth, and hunger with equal patience. No wonder suspicious cooks slowly begin to reconsider. Yet adoption is not only about taste. To grow potatoes well, people need seed tubers, instructions, confidence, and enough spare land to test them. They need to learn when to plant, how deeply to bury, how to store, how to avoid greening, how to cook them safely. A crop is never just a crop. It is a set of habits. The potato asks Europeans to learn new gestures, hilling soil around stems, saving tubers for planting, protecting stores from rot, watching for frost. These gestures spread slowly from hand to hand. As dusk settles over the monastery, the garden loses its sharp edges. The potato plants become dark shapes among herbs and cabbages. A bell calls the brothers to prayer, and footsteps fade along the cloister. You remain near the bed, touching one leaf lightly between your fingers. It feels cool, slightly rough, alive with a future nobody here can fully imagine. In these quiet gardens, the potato is being translated, not from one language into another, but from curiosity into possibility. It is observed, named, doubted, tasted, moved, and planted again. It passes through careful hands before it reaches hungry fields. For now, it belongs to notebooks, cloisters, and experimental corners. The world outside still trusts bread more than tubers. But in the protected silence of these walls, a new habit is beginning to root itself, one small plant at a time. You enter a century of persuasion, where the potato is no longer merely studied behind garden walls. It is being coaxed, advertised, defended, and, in some places, practically smuggled into respectability. The air is warmer now, lowland air, with the smell of damp fields, horse manure, bakery smoke, and market stalls opening under a pale morning sky. Church bells ring over tiled roofs, cartwheels grind over cobbles. Somewhere, a rooster announces himself with the confidence of a town official. The potato has a problem. It is useful, nourishing, and productive. But people do not always trust useful things simply because they are useful. They must be persuaded, sometimes with reason, sometimes with royal orders, sometimes with little theatrical tricks, because apparently even vegetables need public relations. You walk through a French town where hunger has taught hard lessons. Grain harvests can fail, bread prices can rise, crowds can become nervous, and nervous crowds are rarely soothing company. Into this world steps Antoine Augustin Parmentier, a pharmacist and agricultural promoter who becomes one of the potato's great European advocates. He had encountered potatoes as food while imprisoned in Prussia during the 7 Years' War, and he later worked to convince France that this tuber was not a suspicious underground insult, but a practical crop capable of easing hunger. A mainstream historical fact is that Parmentier promoted potato cultivation in France during the late 18th century, using scientific arguments, public demonstrations, and connections with influential figures. He helped shift elite opinion by presenting potatoes as wholesome and valuable. He did not single-handedly make France eat potatoes, because history is not usually that tidy, but he became a powerful symbol of the campaign. You follow him, or someone very like him, into a field planted with potatoes near Paris. The soil is loose and dark. A breeze moves the leaves with a soft shiver. The plants are arranged in careful rows, looking innocent enough, though public opinion still eyes them like a suspicious neighbour. The famous story says that Parmentier posted guards around potato fields by day. making villagers think the crop was precious, then left the fields unguarded at night so people would steal the tubers and plant them. It is a delightful tale, almost too neat, like something invented by a potato with a flair for drama. One quirky tidbit is that Parmentier also used potato flowers as fashionable decoration. The tale goes that potato blossoms were worn by aristocrats, even by royal figures, helping turn the plant into a symbol of enlightened taste. Imagine the potato, after centuries of being called ugly and dangerous, suddenly getting invited to court as floral jewellery. Very graceful, very absurd, very 18th century. You drift into a salon where candles burn low and polished furniture gleams. The room smells of wax, perfume, wine, paper, and warm fabric. Educated guests discuss agriculture, population, famine relief, science, and reform. A plate of potato-based dishes appears. People taste cautiously, then more confidently. The potato is being made respectable through conversation and cuisine. It is entering the world of pamphlets, experiments, and enlightened improvement, where every practical problem seems solvable if enough gentlemen write essays about it. Beyond France, other rulers and officials try to encourage potato farming. In parts of Prussia, Frederick the Great pushed cultivation through orders and demonstrations. In the Habsburg lands, administrators promoted new crops as tools of population management and rural security. Across Europe, officials increasingly understood that a crop yielding abundant calories from small plots could strengthen states. More food meant more people. More people meant more workers, soldiers, taxpayers, and subjects to organize, command, and occasionally disappoint. You stand beside a village field where an official reads instructions aloud. Farmers listen with arms crossed. Some are curious, some are annoyed. Some look at the potato baskets as though they have been handed a chore wrapped in mud. The official explains planting depths, spacing, yields, and benefits. A child kicks at the dirt. A dog sniffs a tuber and makes no formal objection. The farmers know something the official may not fully appreciate. New crops are risky. If a recommendation fails, the official writes another report. The farmer goes hungry. Historians still argue whether state campaigns were the decisive force behind potato adoption, or whether ordinary hunger, local experimentation, and market pressures mattered more. In many places, government promotion helped, but crops rarely spread by command alone. People plant what they believe will feed them. They need proof, not just proclamations. A decree can order potatoes into the ground, but it cannot make a family love them at supper. You enter a peasant home at dusk. The walls are rough, the ceiling low, the floor swept clean. A pot hangs over the fire. The room smells of smoke, wool, onions, and boiling potatoes. This is where persuasion truly succeeds or fails. Not in royal gardens, not in scientific societies. Here, at the table, where hands are tired and bellies honest, the potatoes are mashed with milk, stirred into soup, baked in ashes, or eaten with salt. They are filling. Children stop complaining for a few blessed minutes, which may be the strongest argument in agricultural history. The texture is soft against the tongue, carrying whatever flavour the household can afford, butter if lucky, herbs if available, cabbage if necessary, nothing much if times are hard. Potatoes do not demand luxury. They accept poverty without judgment. That quality helps them move through Europe's poorer regions, though not always evenly and not always quickly. Climate, soils, laws, landholding, and culture all shape their path. In markets, the potato begins to change its social meaning. At first, it may be associated with the poor, prisoners, or animals. Then gradually, it becomes a tool of resilience. Sellers pile tubers in baskets, buyers press them, sniff them, compare sizes. The market smells of straw, mud, cheese, fish, leather, and human impatience. A woman chooses small potatoes for soup. A man buys larger ones for planting. A cook mutters that they're good enough if properly seasoned, which is praise in its most reluctant and therefore believable form. The potatoes promoters do not always win through charm. Some communities resist fiercely. Rumours persist. Mistakes happen. Green potatoes make people ill. Poor storage causes rot. Bad instructions create bad harvests. Still, the crop keeps proving itself where conditions suit it. It feeds families from plots too small for generous grain harvests. It survives hidden under soil when armies pass. It gives dense nourishment in cold climates. Slowly, suspicion becomes habit. Habit becomes reliance. Reliance becomes tradition. Night settles over the countryside. The fields darken. Smoke rises from cottages in thin blue threads. You hear spoons against bowls, a baby fussing, someone laughing softly at a joke too local for history to preserve. In one home, a farmer sets aside the best tubers for seed. That quiet choice matters more than any speech. It means the potato has passed the test of hunger, labour, and taste. The persuaders may have worn flowers, written treatises, staged guarded fields, and courted kings. But the potato's real victory comes in the low murmur of kitchens, where practical people decide that this strange crop is worth planting again. Outside, the soil cools under the moon. Beneath it, saved tubers wait for spring, silent little ambassadors of a future that smells faintly of smoke, rain, and supper. You step into a damp Irish field where the morning mist lies low over the ridges, softening every hedge, stone wall, and cottage roof into grey-green quiet. The air smells of peat smoke, wet grass, sea wind, and dark soil open by the spade. Under your boots, the ground gives slightly, full of moisture and stubborn life. A crow calls from a fence post. Somewhere beyond the mist, a cow shifts against a gate, and the faint clink of a pail carries through the cool air. Here, the potato becomes more than a crop. It becomes the centre of daily survival for millions. You walk between long ridges known as lazy beds. Though the name is a little unfair, there is nothing lazy about turning heavy Irish soil with a spade, layering manure and seed potatoes, and shaping raised beds by hand while rain considers whether it should fall now or in 5 minutes. The ridges help drainage in wet ground. They hold warmth. They make small plots productive. They are practical, repetitive, and physically demanding, which is exactly the kind of thing history often labels with a casual insult. A family works nearby. A man drives the spade into the earth with a wet slice. A woman places seed pieces carefully. A child carries manure in a basket, making a face because history may be grand. But manure remains manure. Their clothing is coarse and damp at the cuffs. Their hands are red from cold. The field is not large, but the expectation placed upon it is enormous. From this small holding must come enough food to carry a household through months of labour, rent, uncertainty, and rain that seems to have a long personal agenda. A mainstream historical fact is that by the 18th and early 19th centuries, the potato had become a staple food for much of the rural Irish population, especially among the poor. It produced high yields on small plots and, when combined with milk or buttermilk where available, could support a basic diet with enough calories and important nutrients. In a land where many tenants had limited access to land and paid rent under difficult conditions, the potato's productivity made dense rural populations possible. You enter a small cottage as evening gathers. The doorway is low. Smoke curls from a hearth where peat burns with a sweet, earthy scent. The room is dim, warm near the fire and cold near the walls. Potatoes boil in an iron pot, knocking softly against one another as the water trembles. Steam fogs the air. A woman tips them into a basket, their skins splitting, their heat rising in thick white clouds. The family eats from a shared dish, dipping potatoes into salt or buttermilk. There is little ceremony, but there is comfort. The first bite is hot, plain, and filling. with the soft texture of food that does not ask questions. Outside the cottage, social conditions are less comforting. Much Irish land is controlled by landlords, many of whom are Protestant and sometimes absent, while many tenant families are Catholic and live with insecure tenure or small subdivisions of land. The potato fits this strained world too well. It lets families survive on tiny plots, but it also allows the system to continue squeezing people into smaller spaces. The crop is generous, and that generosity becomes dangerous when society builds itself around the assumption that generosity will never fail. One quirky tidbit is that some Irish adults ate astonishing quantities of potatoes in a day, with estimates in certain accounts reaching several pounds per person. The numbers vary, and you should always treat old dietary estimates with a calm eyebrow raised. But the basic point remains: potatoes were not a side dish here. They were breakfast, dinner, supper, fuel, comfort, and the quiet bulk of life. The phrase meat and potatoes would have sounded luxurious to many. For them, it was often potatoes and potatoes with a poetic garnish of more potatoes. You walk along a boreen, a narrow country lane bordered by hedges glittering with rain. The leaves brush your sleeve, cool and wet. You hear the soft squelch of footsteps, the distant bleat of sheep, and the steady drip from branches. Cottages appear in small clusters. Smoke lifts from chimneys. In one doorway, an old woman watches the weather with the expression of someone who has never trusted a sky in her life. She's probably correct. The potato shapes the rhythm of the year. Planting, earthing up, lifting, storing, cooking. A good harvest brings relief. A poor one brings anxiety. Families may keep pigs, selling them to pay rent while eating the potatoes themselves. The pig becomes, in a sense, a walking savings account, though one that makes strong smells and objects loudly to being moved. Potatoes feed people directly and also support animals, rent payments, and local exchange. The crop sits inside a web of obligation. Historians still debate how to balance the potato's role against the wider political and economic structures that made Irish dependence so severe. The tuber itself did not create poverty, colonial inequality, land hunger, or fragile tenancy. But it allowed a large population to survive under those pressures. Some scholars emphasise population growth and small holdings. Others stress British policy, landlordism, export agriculture, and rural vulnerability. The potato is central, but it is not the villain. Blaming the potato alone would be like blaming an umbrella for a storm. In the field, you see why reliance deepens. 1 acre of potatoes can feed more people than an acre of grain under many conditions. The plants grow hidden beneath ridges, protected from some weather and theft. They suit the cool, moist Irish climate. They require labour. Yes, but not expensive equipment. For poor tenants, this matters. The potato is accessible in a world where many other forms of security are not. Yet there is a narrowing here. Many people come to rely heavily on a few varieties, especially the high-yielding lumper potato in the 19th century. It is productive, but not especially diverse. Fields planted with similar potatoes can look reassuring in good years, green and abundant under soft rain. But sameness has a shadow. Diversity in crops can soften disaster. Dependence can sharpen it. You feel that danger without naming it too loudly, like a draft under a door. For now, the field is alive. Leaves spread lush and green across the ridges. White and purple blossoms nod in the breeze. Bees move in brief, trembling visits. The soil smells rich when opened. A child digs with both hands and laughs when a cluster of potatoes comes free. Round and pale in the mud. There is joy in harvest. There is pride in a full basket. There is relief in knowing that tonight, at least, the pot will be heavy. As darkness settles, rain begins again, light at first, whispering over the thatch and hedges. Inside the cottage, the family gathers close to the hearth. The fire glows low. The cooked potatoes steam in a mound, simple and sustaining. You feel the warmth of the room against your damp clothes, the rough wood of the stool beneath you, the soft hush of people eating after work. The Irish potato world is tender and precarious at once. It carries laughter, labour, songs, rent worries, children's hunger, full baskets, and the wet green smell of fields under cloud. The crop gives life with extraordinary generosity. But when one food becomes the floor beneath millions of feet, the whole house depends on that floor holding firm. You stand at the edge of an Irish potato field in late summer, and at first the scene seems almost peaceful. The leaves spread thickly across the ridges, green and close, beaded with dampness from the morning mist. The air smells of wet soil, crushed stems, peat smoke, and distant rain. A robin flickers along a hedge. A cart creaks on a lane beyond the field. Everything appears ordinary, which is how disaster often enters, not with thunder, not with a theatrical villain's cape, just with a strange smell on the wind and a few dark spots on a leaf. You bend closer. The plant in front of you is marked by blotches, brown and black, spreading at the edges like ink through cloth. Some leaves curl and collapse. A faint sour odour rises from the greenery, not the clean smell of healthy growth, but something damp, rotten, and unsettling. The stems look injured. The field still stands, but it no longer feels safe. It feels as if something invisible has passed through in the night and placed a cold hand on every row. This is potato blight, caused by the organism Phytophthora infestans. In the 19th century, people did not yet understand it in modern biological terms. They saw the symptoms: leaves blackening, plants failing, tubers rotting in the ground or in storage. They smelled decay. They dug frantically and found potatoes turned soft, dark, and foul. The crop that had seemed so faithful suddenly became unrecognizable, and the shock of that betrayal was almost impossible to measure. You follow a farmer into the ridges. His spade cuts into the wet earth with a heavy sound. He lifts the soil, expecting pale tubers, and finds ruin. Some potatoes are still firm, but others break apart under his fingers into a stinking paste. The smell is sharp and sickening, a mixture of cellar damp, sour rot, and muddy water. He wipes his hand against the grass, then stops, because there is no clean place to wipe away fear. A mainstream historical fact is that potato blight struck Ireland in the 1840s, devastating the crop on which a large part of the population depended. The failures were especially severe beginning in 1845, with repeated destruction across several seasons. Blight also affected other parts of Europe, but Ireland's heavy dependence on the potato, combined with poverty, land inequality, and political failures, made the impact catastrophic. In the cottage, anxiety thickens the air. Potatoes dug too early lie in baskets near the door. Some look sound. Others have begun to soften, their skins bruised and leaking. A woman cuts one open, searching for edible flesh. The knife makes a wet sound against the board. A child watches silently, learning too soon that grown-ups can be frightened. Rain taps against the thatch. The hearth smokes. Nobody has much appetite, but hunger does not politely wait for confidence to return. The first reports of disease travel unevenly. A neighbour says one field is gone. Another says his crop looks fine. Someone claims the air itself is poisoned. Someone else blames fog, electricity, bad seed, divine punishment, foreign contamination, or the general suspiciousness of damp weather. The actual pathogen thrives in cool, wet conditions, spreading by spores, but that explanation belongs to a scientific understanding not yet fully available to most people at the time. When knowledge is incomplete, rumour rushes in wearing a very dramatic hat. One quirky tidbit is that some people thought the blight might be caused by railway smoke, volcanic dust, or mysterious vapours drifting through the atmosphere. It sounds odd now, But in a world without germ theory as everyday knowledge, invisible destruction invited invisible explanations. And honestly, if your entire field turned black in a few days, you might also start accusing the sky of misconduct. You walk along the lane toward the village. The hedges are wet against your sleeve. The road is slick with mud and hoofprints. People speak in lowered voices outside cottages, beside wells, near the chapel gate. A priest hears fearful accounts. A landlord's agent counts rent still due. A shopkeeper watches faces grow thinner. The smell of damaged potatoes begins appearing in yards and pits, a heavy odour that clings to memory. You notice how quickly private trouble becomes public dread. One family's failed crop is grief. A district's failed crop is a warning bell. Historians still argue whether early government responses were delayed more by disbelief, ideology, administrative confusion, or indifference toward the rural poor. Some officials recognized the seriousness of the crop failure, while others underestimated the scale or trusted too much in market mechanisms and limited relief. The debate is not gentle because the consequences were not gentle. Policy, prejudice, and hunger met in the same muddy field. The blight does not merely destroy food, it destroys planning. Seed potatoes saved for the next planting may rot, rent cannot be paid, pigs may be sold too cheaply, tools pawned, clothes traded, debts accumulated. A household that once lived close to the edge now finds the edge has moved beneath its feet. You hear the sound of a chest being opened, the quiet clink of a few coins counted and counted again, as if arithmetic might produce mercy. In fields that remain partly healthy, people rush to salvage what they can. The atmosphere is frantic but muffled by exhaustion. Men and women dig in damp weather, their backs bent. Hands roar from soil. Children gather small tubers in baskets. The good potatoes are separated from the bad. Storage pits are checked, then checked again. There is no calm, farmerly rhythm now. There is urgency, confusion, and the awful knowledge that a potato which looks safe today may rot tomorrow. The plant itself seems almost ghostly in its speed of collapse. A field can appear green one week and blacken soon after. Leaves wilt, stems darken, tubers decay underground, hidden until the spade reveals them. That hiddenness deepens the terror. Grain fails in visible ways, stalks thin, heads empty, fields flattened. Potatoes keep their verdict beneath the soil. You do not know the truth until you dig. As evening lowers over the village, the mist gathers again. Smoke rises from cottages, but the smell of supper is weaker. A pot boils with fewer potatoes than usual. People eat slowly, stretching the meal. Outside, the diseased fields lie quiet under a grey sky. The ridges still hold their shape, but their promise has changed. You place your hand on the cool wooden doorframe of a cottage and listen. The rain, the fire, the low voices, the distant cough of livestock, all seem smaller beneath the weight of uncertainty. The potato had been trusted because it was generous, hidden, and dependable. Now the same hidden earth has become a place of dread. Beneath the leaves, beneath the ridges, beneath the routines of daily life, something has broken, and the silence after that breaking is terribly deep. You stand at a harbour in the grey light of morning, where the sea breathes against the quay with a slow, cold heaviness. The air smells of salt, tar, wet rope, coal smoke, unwashed wool, and fear held too long in crowded bodies. Gulls cry overhead, sharp and restless. Wooden crates scrape across stone. A child coughs into a shawl. People gather with bundles tied in cloth, with small boxes, with almost nothing, waiting for ships that promise departure but not comfort. The famine has become movement. Hunger has loosened people from homes, fields, lanes, and graveyards, pushing them toward roads, workhouses, ports, and oceans. You walk among families who do not look like travellers in the cheerful sense. They are leaving because staying has become impossible. Some carry tickets sent by relatives. Some have been assisted by landlords eager to reduce obligations. Some have sold nearly every possession worth naming. A woman grips a rosary so tightly the beads press marks into her palm. A man keeps looking back toward the town, though there is no one there who can feed him. A mainstream historical fact is that the Great Famine of the 1840s caused mass death and mass emigration from Ireland. Around 1 million people died, and roughly another million left in the years surrounding the disaster, with many travelling to Britain, North America and beyond. The population of Ireland fell dramatically and continued declining for decades. These numbers are vast, but standing at the harbour, you understand that every number was once a face in the damp wind. You step onto a ship's deck. The boards are slick beneath your shoes. Below, steerage is dark and cramped, filled with the smells of stale air, damp bedding, sickness, salt water, and food packed for a voyage that may stretch painfully long. People settle into narrow spaces. The creak of timber becomes constant, like an old animal breathing in its sleep. Waves slap the hull, babies cry, prayers rise in whispers. Someone tries to sing, but the song fades before it gathers strength. Ships carrying famine emigrants gained a grim reputation, especially when disease spread in crowded conditions. Some vessels were later remembered as coffin ships, a phrase heavy with grief. Not every ship was equally deadly, and experiences varied by route, season, captain, provisions, and disease. But many voyages were harsh. Typhus, cholera, dysentery, and fever could move through cramped quarters with terrifying ease. You feel the rough plank against your back, the damp blanket at your shoulder, the closeness of strangers who are now companions in uncertainty. One quirky tidbit, if anything in such a setting can be called quirky without sounding indecently cheerful, is that emigrants often carried tiny practical treasures rather than sentimental luxuries: a cooking pot, a tool, a prayer book, a lock of hair, a packet of seed, or a scrap of home soil sewn into cloth. These objects were small anchors against the ocean's enormous indifference. A potato itself might not survive the crossing as a useful seed, but memory of potato fields crossed with them, folded into hunger, humour, resentment, and longing. You listen to the voices around you, Irish, English, and sometimes both in tangled rhythm. People speak of Liverpool, Quebec, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, St. John, Glasgow, and places they know only through rumour. A boy asks whether America has enough bread. Someone answers that America has everything, because hope often exaggerates when packing for a long trip. An old man says nothing. He watches the shoreline shrink until mist takes it away. Migration transforms grief into neighbourhoods. You walk, in imagination, into a street in New York where Irish newcomers crowd into tenements near docks and workshops. The air smells of coal, horse dung, cabbage, river mud, and sweat. Carts rattle. Vendors shout. Church bells mingle with factory whistles. Families take work as labourers, domestic servants, dockhands, canal diggers, laundresses, soldiers, seamstresses, and anything else available. They face discrimination, suspicion, poverty, and disease. Yet they build churches, mutual aid societies, newspapers, political machines, unions, and homes that carry pieces of Ireland into brick and noise. In Britain too, though. Irish famine migrants reshape cities such as Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, and London. They arrive exhausted, often poor, sometimes ill, frequently unwelcome. Some local communities fear competition for work and relief. Prejudice sharpens in crowded streets. Yet migrants also become part of industrial life, laying tracks, loading ships, digging foundations, washing clothes, raising children, voting when allowed, and slowly changing the sound and structure of urban life. Historians still debate the relative weight of immediate blight. British government policy, landlord actions, market exports, relief failures, and long-term colonial structures in shaping the catastrophe and the migration that followed. The potato disease was real, but famine is never only a plant disease, it is also a social failure, a political decision, a question of who is protected and who is left to endure. The arguments remain intense because the suffering became part of national memory, identity, and moral reckoning. You return to a country lane emptied by departure. Grass grows over thresholds. A cottage wall leans inward. Roof collapsed. Rain gathers in hollows where a floor once held footsteps. The smell is of wet stone, nettles, and silence. There are fewer voices in the fields now. Fewer children running along hedges. Fewer hands to plant, dig, and mend. The famine does not end when the last failed crop is lifted. It lingers in absence, in family names scattered across oceans, in letters read until the folds weaken, in remittances sent home coin by coin. And yet, life continues. Because human beings have a stubbornness that even catastrophe fails to fully extinguish. In a kitchen in Boston, someone boils potatoes again. Not as dependence, but as memory. In a boarding house in Liverpool, a woman mashes them with onions when she can afford both. In a Canadian winter, an Irish family learns new soils, new cold, new neighbours. The potato remains on the table, complicated now, comfort and warning, nourishment and loss, ordinary food carrying extraordinary weight. Night settles over the Atlantic. The ship moves through dark water under a sky blurred by cloud. You hear the groan of ropes, the murmur of prayers, the thin breathing of sleeping passengers. Somewhere below deck, a mother tells a child about a field at home, how the ridges looked when the leaves were green, how the earth felt soft after rain. Her voice is low and steady, not because she is unafraid, but because the child needs steadiness. You feel the oceans rise and fall beneath you. The potato has changed the world here not by conquest or glamour, but by failing in a place where too much had been made to depend upon it. From that failure, people carry language, music, politics, faith, anger, jokes, recipes, and memory across the sea. The small tuber remains behind in ruined fields and travels forward in every hungry story told by those who survived. You walk into a European field at dawn, and the world smells of wet straw, horse sweat, chimney smoke, and newly turned soil. The sky is pale, the kind of pale that makes everything look honest and slightly tired. A farmer bends over a row of potato plants, shaking dew from the leaves with his sleeve. Beyond the field, a village wakes slowly. A cartwheel complains. A church bell mutters into the morning. Somewhere, a baby cries as if personally insulted by sunrise. The potato has become a quiet engine of population, labour, and power. It is not wearing a crown. It is not mounted on a horse. It is simply growing underground, making dense food in places where grain can be uncertain. In parts of Europe, especially in cooler or poorer soils, potatoes offer families a way to produce more calories from small plots. That sounds plain, almost dull. But plain food can move history more effectively than speeches. Speeches do not fill soup pots. They try. Bless them. But they do not. You enter a village household where breakfast is being prepared before a long day of work. The room is smoky and close. A pot hangs over embers, and potatoes simmer in water, cloudy with starch. The smell is warm, earthy, and slightly sweet. A woman lifts them out with a wooden spoon, steam wetting her face. A man cuts one open with a small knife and sprinkles salt over the soft flesh. The heat warms his cracked fingers. Outside, the fields wait. Inside, the potato gives him enough strength to begin. A mainstream historical fact is that the potato contributed to population growth and food security in parts of Europe from the 18th century onward. Because it produced high yields per acre and supplied substantial calories, it helped support rural households and expanding towns. It did not act alone, of course. Improvements in agriculture, trade, public health, and political structures also mattered. Still, the potato became one of the crops that helped more people survive to work and raise families in a changing Europe. You move from the village toward a town where workshops and early factories are multiplying. Smoke stains the air. The sound of hammers, wheels, looms, and boots mixes with shouts from markets. Workers need cheap, filling food. Potatoes become part of that answer. They can be boiled quickly, carried cold, fried in pans, mashed into leftovers, stretched with cabbage, onions, or scraps of meat. A potato may not make factory life pleasant. Let us not flatter the tuber too much, but it can make long hours more survivable. In a crowded urban kitchen, you feel the heat of a stove against your knees. The air smells of coal smoke, boiled greens, damp wool, and potatoes browning in fat. A labourer's wife slices them thin, dropping them into a pan where they hiss softly. Children wait with the intense silence of small people trying to influence cooking through staring. The meal is simple, but it has weight. It holds the family through the cold evening and into another day of wages. The potato also changes military supply. Soldiers on campaign need food that can be grown locally, stored, and prepared in quantity. Grain remains crucial, but potatoes provide another source of sustenance, especially where armies move through rural regions already growing them. You stand near a camp where smoke from field kitchens drifts across trampled grass. Men scrape mud from boots, mend straps, and line up for stew thickened with potatoes. The smell of broth, leather, wet canvas, and tired bodies hangs low in the air. No general wins a battle on an empty stomach, although many have tried to compensate with confidence. Results vary. One quirky tidbit is that potatoes could sometimes survive wartime destruction better than grain because the edible part was hidden underground. Soldiers might burn fields of wheat or seize stored grain, but potatoes beneath the soil could be overlooked, at least for a while. This was not perfect protection. Armies are very good at finding food when hungry. Still, hidden harvests offered rural families a small advantage in a violent age. The potato's talent for looking unimportant became, once again, useful. You travel into the Prussian countryside, where officials take an interest in the crop as a tool of state strength. A sturdy rural population can feed armies, pay taxes, work fields, and populate territories. This is the chilly arithmetic of governments. Potatoes appeal to administrators because they seem to promise resilience. A village with potatoes may withstand grain shortages better. A kingdom with more food can support more people. More people can become more soldiers. And suddenly the humble tuber finds itself implicated in geopolitics, which seems unfair. But history rarely asks vegetables for consent. Historians still argue about how much credit the potato deserves for Europe's population increase and economic transformation. Some scholars see it as a major driver of demographic growth, especially in regions where it spread deeply. Others warn against giving one crop too much power in a story shaped by land tenure, wages, climate, disease, markets, and government policy. The fairest view may be that potatoes opened possibilities where conditions allowed, but they did not magically fix inequality or poor harvests. A tuber can do a lot. It cannot repair every human arrangement, especially the foolish ones we keep polishing as tradition. In the countryside, the potato reshapes labour rhythms. Planting requires cutting and setting seed tubers. The soil must be ridged or hilled. Harvest means digging, lifting, sorting, storing. Children gather small potatoes. Women and men work side by side in heavy weather. The work is tactile and repetitive, the scrape of spade, the cold slide of mud under fingernails, The thud of tubers dropped into baskets, the rough weave of sacks against palms. The crop is generous, but not effortless. Nothing that feeds millions arrives without someone bending their back. You pass a market square where potatoes are piled in heaps beside cabbages, apples, onions, and coarse bread. Horses stamp in the chill. Sellers call out prices. Buyers press tubers to test firmness. The smell is a lively mixture of mud, straw, cheese, smoke, and human impatience. A baker looks slightly offended by the popularity of the potato, as if bread has been betrayed by the lower classes, but people buy what fills the belly. Loyalty to tradition softens when children are hungry. In some regions, potatoes also support livestock, distilling, and starch production. They move beyond the cooking pot into rural economies. Surplus tubers may become feed for pigs or cattle. They may be turned into spirits, which governments then notice and tax, because governments have a supernatural ability to smell taxable fermentation. Potato starch enters crafts and industries. The crop's usefulness spreads quietly into corners of daily life that most people never think to thank. As evening settles, you stand in a field after harvest. The soil is dark and broken. Baskets are full. The air has the cooling smell of autumn leaves, smoke, damp earth, and stored food. A farmer closes the cellar door over sacks of potatoes. Inside, the darkness is cool and still. The tubers rest in heaps, rough-skinned and silent, holding the labour of the year. Europe is changing around them. Villages feed towns, towns feed factories, states count people, soldiers, taxes, and grain. Families count meals. The potato sits at the centre of these calculations without boasting. It has become an ordinary miracle, which is the kind people notice least. You hold one in your hand, heavy with water and starch, and feel how a simple underground crop can steady a worker, fill a barracks, support a child, and give a government one more reason to imagine itself powerful. You enter a Russian village beneath a wide grey sky, where the earth stretches flat and dark beyond wooden houses, birch trees, and fences leaning with the quiet confidence of old complaints. The air is cold enough to sharpen every breath. It smells of damp logs, horse sweat, cabbage soup, smoke from clay stoves, and soil waiting to thaw. Somewhere a rooster calls late, as if even he has doubts about the schedule. A dog barks once, then decides the matter is not worth pursuing. Here, the potato arrives not only as food, but as an argument. It moves through decrees, suspicion, hunger, rumour, and reluctant planting. In Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, the path toward acceptance is uneven, shaped by rulers who want more secure food supplies and villagers who have very reasonable questions about strange crops being pushed from above. You walk past a row of houses where women in headscarves carry water, men mend tools, and children watch everything with the serious attention of small historians who have not yet learned to write. A government official has arrived with instructions. His boots are clean enough to be unpopular. He speaks of planting, yields, usefulness, and the need to obey imperial guidance. The villagers listen in silence, which is not the same as agreement. A basket of seed potatoes sits nearby, plain and muddy. Nobody applauds. This is the problem with introducing a crop by order. Even a good idea begins to smell faintly of someone else's authority. A mainstream historical fact is that Russian rulers and officials promoted potato cultivation from the 18th century into the 19th century, but widespread adoption took time. The crop was encouraged under imperial policy as a way to improve food security and rural productivity. Yet many peasants resisted, misunderstood, or distrusted it at first, especially when instructions came through official channels. Acceptance grew gradually as people learned how to plant, cook, and store potatoes, and as the crop proved useful in harsh climates and difficult soils. You step into a smoky izba, a wooden peasant house warmed by a large stove. The walls are darkened by years of smoke and touch. The air is thick with the smell of rye bread, fermented cabbage, damp wool, and hot clay. A few potatoes lie on a bench beside turnips and onions. An old woman eyes them with suspicion. She has seen officials come and go, each carrying new promises in one hand and new burdens in the other. The potato is not judged only as a plant. It is judged as a messenger from power. One quirky tidbit is that some Russian peasants reportedly called potatoes devil's apples, or associated them with danger because the plant produced small green berries above ground. Those berries are not the edible part, and they can be toxic. If someone tried eating them instead of the tubers, the result would not improve the potato's reputation. Imagine being introduced to a crop, eating the wrong part, getting sick, and then being told the problem is your attitude. Truly, agriculture can be a communication challenge. You walk out toward the village field. The ground is heavy and wet after thaw. The soil clings to boots and spades. A man cuts seed potatoes with a knife, each piece bearing an eye that might sprout. He handles them cautiously. Beside him, a boy asks whether the eyes can see. The man snorts, but he glances at the tuber anyway, because folk imagination has a way of making even vegetables slightly watchful. In parts of the Russian Empire, resistance to potatoes became tangled with broader resentment of state authority, landowners, and forced innovation. There were disturbances sometimes called potato riots, especially in the 19th century, when peasants opposed compulsory planting or feared hidden motives behind official orders. Rumours spread that potatoes were being used to enslave people further, mark land, impose new taxes, or violate custom. The exact rumours varied, but the emotional truth was simple. Poor villagers did not trust powerful people to change their food for purely benevolent reasons. One cannot exactly blame them for keeping an eyebrow raised. Historians still argue about how large and widespread early Russian potato resistance truly was, and how much later storytelling exaggerated the drama. Some accounts emphasize riots and fear. Others point to steady local adoption where conditions made sense. Written records often reflect official frustration, not the quiet experiments of households who planted a few tubers behind a barn and waited to see whether dinner improved. The potato road through Russia was not one road, but many paths across villages, estates, monasteries, military settlements, and markets. You enter a monastery garden in the north, where potatoes grow beside cabbages and medicinal herbs. The air smells of pine resin, wet soil, and candle wax drifting from a chapel door. Monks and estate managers sometimes help spread the crop by testing varieties and teaching cultivation. In manor gardens, landowners may experiment with potatoes before urging peasants to adopt them. In military contexts, the state sees their value for feeding soldiers. Slowly, reluctantly, the tuber becomes familiar. The climate helps make the argument. Long winters demand stored food. Rye can fail. Frost can damage crops. Potatoes grow well in many cooler regions, and they can produce heavily in small plots. You stand beside a cellar where sacks of potatoes rest in the dark, protected from freezing. The smell inside is cool and earthy, with a faint mineral dampness. The tubers are not exciting. That is the point. They wait. They keep. They can become soup, cakes, dumplings, mash, animal feed, or spirits. In a place where winter has no sense of humour, waiting food is a blessing. In a village kitchen, someone finally cooks them without ceremony. The potatoes boil beside cabbage. Steam fills the room and beads on the small window. A woman crushes them with salt and a little fat, then folds them into a pan with onions. The smell changes from plain earthiness to something warm and persuasive. A child takes a bite and immediately burns his tongue, which is possibly the most universal proof that a food has entered real life. No official decree can compete with a hungry child reaching for more. Over time, the potato finds a place in Eastern European foodways. It appears in soups, pancakes, dumplings, pierogi fillings, draniki, babka, kopitka, and countless household dishes shaped by region, religion, class, and season. In some areas, it joins older staples rather than replacing them completely. Rye bread remains beloved. Cabbage keeps its sour, loyal place. Buckwheat, oats, beets, mushrooms, dairy, and fish all continue their work. The potato does not conquer the table in one glorious charge. It pulls up a stool and becomes impossible to send away. You walk through a market in late autumn. The mud is cold, and the sky presses low. Women sell potatoes from sacks, their fingers reddened by chill. Buyers choose by size and firmness. Horses steam in the cold air. The market smells of hay, smoke, pickles, wool, and wet leather. A man jokes that potatoes are now so common they must be Russian by adoption. Someone answers that anything able to survive the winter deserves citizenship. As night falls, snow begins lightly, soft flakes drifting onto roofs and fences. Inside the izba, the stove glows. A pot of potato soup thickens slowly, stirred with a wooden spoon. The room grows calmer. Outside, the official road disappears under white. Inside, people eat what the earth has given and what experience has finally approved. The potato's Russian journey is not a simple tale of discovering gratitude. It is a story of pressure, fear, learning, stubbornness, adaptation, and eventual intimacy. You feel the warmth of a bowl in your hands, hear the spoon scrape softly, and smell the steam rising with onion and smoke. A crop once treated as foreign, suspicious, even wicked, has become ordinary enough to be loved without speeches. That is how many revolutions end, not with banners, but with supper. You walk into a mountain field in western China, where the slopes rise in folded green layers and clouds cling to the ridges like soft wool. The air is cool, damp, and faintly smoky from cooking fires hidden among village houses. Somewhere nearby, water runs through a narrow channel with a bright, quick sound. The soil under your shoes is loose and dark, recently opened by hose. Potato plants grow in rows beside maize, buckwheat, beans, and vegetables, their leaves trembling whenever the wind slides down from the heights. Here, the potato enters Asia not as one single dramatic arrival, but as many arrivals, many experiments, many quiet acceptances. It travels through trade routes, colonial gardens, missionary plots, mountain communities, military needs, and local markets. It meets climates as different as Himalayan valleys, Chinese uplands, Indian hill stations, and Southeast Asian highlands. The potato is adaptable, yes, but it is not magic. It must negotiate with monsoons, soils, cooking traditions, land pressure, and the very serious opinions of farmers who already know how to feed themselves. A mainstream historical fact is that potatoes spread into Asia after their introduction from the Americas through European and global trade networks, becoming especially important in upland and cooler regions. In China, potatoes took root strongly in mountainous and northern areas. In India, they became significant in hill regions and later in plains agriculture through colonial networks, improved varieties, and expanding markets. Across Asia, the crop often thrived where rice or wheat alone could not answer every need. You stand beside a Chinese farmer lifting potatoes with a hoe. The tool strikes soil with a dry chop, then a cluster of tubers rolls into view, pale gold against black earth. A child gathers them into a basket lined with straw. The sound is gentle thud, scrape, rustle, breath. The smell is sharp with fresh soil and green stems. These potatoes may be boiled, stir-fried with vinegar and chili, sliced into soups, shredded into quick dishes, or stored for leaner months. In many Chinese kitchens, the potato becomes less a plain lump and more a flexible ingredient, able to absorb heat, sourness, spice, and oil with impressive humility. One quirky tidbit is that in parts of China, Potatoes became known by names meaning things like foreign taro or earth bean, depending on region and language. New foods often borrow old names to make themselves less suspicious. It is the culinary equivalent of arriving at a village and saying, "Do not worry. I'm basically like your cousin, just from very far away and shaped strangely." Sometimes this works. Sometimes everyone still stares. You move south and west into Himalayan foothills, where terraced fields catch the sun in narrow steps. Prayer flags snap in the wind. Cowbells and yak bells sound at different distances, soft and hollow. The air smells of pine smoke, damp stone, animal dung, and hot tea. Potatoes grow well in high valleys, where cool temperatures suit them and where farmers need crops that can mature in short seasons. In places across Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, and northern India, potatoes become valuable both for household food and market sale. In a hill kitchen, you sit near a hearth blackened by years of smoke. A woman drops potatoes into a pot with greens, salt, and chilies. Steam rises, carrying a scent that is earthy, sharp, and warming. The floor is cool beneath your feet, packed hard and swept clean. Outside, clouds move across the mountains, hiding and revealing peaks with theatrical timing. The potato is not replacing older foods completely. It is joining them. Barley, millet, rice, maize, lentils, and dairy continue to matter. Asian food systems are not blank pages waiting for a tuber to become the main character. They are crowded, sophisticated conversations, and the potato learns to speak in many accents. Historians still argue about the exact timing and routes by which potatoes first spread through different parts of Asia. Some movements came through Portuguese, Dutch, Spanish, or British connections. Others passed through inland trade, gardens, botanical exchange, or local adoption so ordinary that nobody bothered to write a dramatic announcement. The evidence is uneven, and names for tubers can be confusing. Scholars must sort through travel accounts, agricultural manuals, market records, and local memory, which is a polite way of saying the potato did not leave a tidy trail. You travel to India, where the smells change into a warmer mixture of dust, spice, frying oil, rain on stone, and crowded bazaars. Potatoes entered Indian foodways through colonial and regional routes, and by the 19th and 20th centuries they had become increasingly important in many areas. They fit beautifully into cuisines that already knew how to transform vegetables through spices, heat, and technique. A boiled potato might become aloo curry, aloo paratha, samosa filling, masala dosa stuffing, cheat, or a spice street snack served hot enough to make your fingertips regret your enthusiasm. In a market lane, you hear vendors calling over the clatter of carts and bicycle bells. Potatoes are stacked in burlap sacks, dusty and abundant. A seller plunges his hand into a pile and lets the tubers spill through his fingers. The air smells of coriander, chili, onion, diesel smoke, wet jute, and sweet tea. A cook nearby drops spiced potato patties onto a hot griddle, where they hiss and brown. The potato's blandness, once mocked elsewhere, becomes a virtue here. It carries cumin, mustard seed, turmeric, ginger, garlic, tamarind, and green chili as calmly as a monk carrying water. The crop also becomes commercial. In hill stations and colonial farms, Europeans promote potatoes for their own kitchens and for local markets. Later, agricultural departments, railways, irrigation, and cold storage help expand production in parts of Asia. Farmers grow potatoes not only to eat, but to sell. This changes the crop's meaning. It becomes cash, school fees, debt payments, fertilizer purchases, festival expenses, and sometimes risk when prices fall. A potato in a market is never just a potato. It is weather, labour, transport, bargaining, and hope wearing a dusty skin. You end the day in a high field as fog rises from the valley. The plants are low and green, their flowers pale against the dimming light. A farmer pulls a shawl tighter around her shoulders and looks across the rows with quiet calculation. The crop beneath the soil may feed her family, enter a market, travel by truck, become noodles, curry, stew, or street food in a city far away. The potato has crossed into Asia by becoming local again and again. Not one story, but thousands. Not one flavour, but many. It keeps its old talent for survival, yet it also learns new company chili heat, tea steam, mountain bells, monsoon mud, market noise, and the soft scrape of a hoe in evening soil. You step into a research field at the edge of a cool morning, where rows of potato plants stretch in careful lines beneath a sky the colour of watered milk. The air smells of damp soil, clipped grass, paper seed bags, and the faint chemical tang of a laboratory nearby. Dew gathers on leaves and wets your fingertips when you brush past them. Somewhere, a metal gate clicks in the wind. A notebook page flutters. The potato has entered the age of science, though it still looks, with impressive commitment, like a plant minding its own business. Here, people are no longer only asking whether potatoes will grow, they are asking which potato should grow, where, how fast, with what resistance, with what flavour, and under what threat. Botanists, breeders, pathologists, geneticists, farmers, and seed specialists all gather around the same humble crop. They measure leaves, they weigh tubers, they cross plants by hand, they test for disease, they store samples in cold rooms. The potato, once judged by hunger and habit, is now being examined through microscopes, field trials, and charts that look very serious for something destined to become dinner. A mainstream historical fact is that modern potato breeding has focused heavily on improving yield, disease resistance, storage quality, processing traits, and adaptation to different climates. Breeders have worked especially hard against late blight, the same devastating disease that proved how dangerous genetic narrowness could be. They also seek resistance to viruses, nematodes, bacterial wilt, and other threats. A successful variety must please farmers, markets, cooks, processors, and sometimes consumers who believe all fries should be identical, which is quite a demanding public for a tuber to satisfy. You enter a greenhouse where the air turns warm and wet against your face. Condensation purls on glass panes. Fans hum softly. The smell is green, earthy, and enclosed, with a trace of fertilizer. Potato plants grow in pots arranged by label, each tag holding a code, a cross, a date, a hope. A researcher lifts a flower and gently transfers pollen with a small brush. The gesture is delicate, almost ceremonial. Potato breeding often begins with flowers, berries, and true seeds, even though farmers usually plant tubers. Hidden behind the familiar crop is a surprisingly complicated reproductive life. The potato has range, apparently. One quirky tidbit is that potato plants can produce small tomato-like berries after flowering, though these berries are not eaten because they may contain toxic compounds. Inside them are true potato seeds, each holding a different genetic combination. A single berry can contain many possible futures, which is wonderfully dramatic for something that looks like a tiny green marble with trust issues. In a nearby lab, you hear the soft buzz of equipment and the faint clink of glassware. White benches reflect overhead light. Technicians work with tissue culture, grow in tiny potato plantlets in clear containers filled with sterile medium. The plantlets look fragile, almost like green whispers, but they are part of a powerful system for producing clean seed stock. Disease-free seed potatoes matter because viruses and other pathogens can build up when tubers are replanted repeatedly. A farmer may think the problem is bad luck, poor soil, or a sulking field, when the seed itself is carrying invisible trouble. You walk into a cold storage room and the air bites your skin immediately. Wooden crates and plastic bins hold tubers from different varieties, breeding lines, and trials. The smell is cool and earthy, with that familiar cellar scent of starch and darkness. Each potato is labelled, counted, and watched. Some are tested for how long they keep before sprouting. Some are judged for sugar content, because potatoes that are too sugary may darken unpleasantly when fried. Even a potato must behave under pressure, especially if its future involves hot oil and public opinion. Historians and agricultural scientists still debate how best to balance genetic improvement with the preservation of traditional diversity. Some argue that modern high-yield varieties are essential for feeding large populations and supporting farmers in commercial markets. Others warn that relying too heavily on a narrow range of varieties can increase vulnerability to disease, climate stress, and market shocks. The question is not simple. Diversity can protect, but farmers also need reliable harvests, buyers, seed systems, and income. The potato, once again, refuses to be a tidy moral lesson. Beyond the lab, seed banks and collections hold thousands of potato varieties and wild relatives. You imagine rooms where tiny samples, tubers, seeds, and plant tissues are preserved like a quiet archive of edible possibility. Wild potato species may carry traits that cultivated varieties lack, such as resistance to pests, tolerance to cold, or survival in difficult soils. Breeders search these relatives for useful genes, though the process can be slow and complex. Wild potatoes are not convenient little toolboxes. They come with their own traits, flaws, and botanical stubbornness. In the field, trial plots show the visible side of the work. Some plants are tall and vigorous. Some are disappointing in a very leafy way. Some produce beautiful tubers but fall apart when disease arrives. Others resist infection but taste like a compromise nobody requested. Researchers dig sample plants and lay the tubers on sacks. They note size, shape, skin colour, flesh colour, defects, and yield. Mud clings to their boots. The sun warms the back of your neck. A crow complains from a fence, perhaps reviewing the methodology. Farmers join this science whether or not they wear lab coats. Their fields test varieties under real weather, real pests, real labour costs, and real dinner tables. A variety praised in a trial may fail in a village because it cooks badly, stores poorly, demands too much fertiliser, or fetches a weak price. Agricultural progress does not happen only in research stations. It happens when a farmer lifts a harvest, weighs risk, tastes the result, and decides whether to plant it again. As evening lowers, the research field grows quiet, the leaves darken, soil cools beneath your soles. From the laboratory windows, pale light spills onto the path, and inside, the small work continues, samples labelled, data entered, plantlets checked, tubers stored. The potato is still humble, still earthy, still capable of looking faintly ridiculous in a sack. Yet around it now gathers an immense human effort to protect food from hunger, disease, heat, drought, and sameness. You hold a newly dug tuber in your palm. It is smooth, damp, and slightly warm from the soil. It carries centuries of selection, accident, care, and argument. In its quiet weight, you feel science not as cold distance, but as another form of tending, watching closely, choosing patiently, and hoping that the next harvest will be a little stronger than the last. You enter a factory street where the morning smells of hot oil, coal smoke, wet pavement, and potatoes by the sackful. Carts rattle over stones. Steam rises from vents in soft white bursts. Workers move through wide doors with aprons tied at their waists and caps pulled low, while somewhere inside, machinery begins its steady clatter. The potato has become industrial now. It has left the quiet cellar and the village pot, and it is stepping into a louder world of slicing blades, frying vats, paper packets, starch mills, and very serious debates about crispness. The first sound that reaches you is the hiss of oil. It is sharp, lively, and oddly comforting, like rain falling on a roof but with far more calories involved. In a kitchen or workshop, potatoes are washed, peeled, sliced, and dropped into fat, where they transform almost instantly. Pale flesh turns golden, edges curl, steam rises with a rich smell that seemed designed to weaken human discipline. You may enter with noble intentions, then the fries appear and civilization wobbles. A mainstream historical fact is that potatoes became a foundation of modern processed foods, especially through products like French fries, potato chips, dehydrated flakes, frozen potatoes, and starch. In the 19th and 20th centuries, urbanization, industrial equipment, rail transport, refrigeration, and later freezing technology helped turn potatoes into standardized goods that could travel farther and feed more people in increasingly predictable forms. The potato became not only farm produce but a raw material for mass production. You walk beside a worker sorting potatoes on a moving belt. The tubers roll past with a soft thudding sound, each one inspected for size, rot, bruises, and shape. A misshapen potato may still taste perfectly fine, but machines prefer obedience. Long, smooth potatoes make better fries. Round, even potatoes slice into neater crisps. Industry has opinions, and apparently even vegetables must meet beauty standards. The rejected ones tumble into bins for starch, animal feed, or other uses, because the potato, practical as ever, tries not to waste its chance. In another room, slicing blades flash in a blur. Thin rounds of potato fall like pale coins into water, rinsed of excess starch before meeting oil. The air is warm and humid, touching your face with a film of steam. Then comes the fryer. The slices vanish into bubbling fat, and after a short spell of crackling noise, they rise crisp and golden. Salt scatters across them in a fine white shower. The smell is immediate toasted starch, oil, salt, and that deep roasted sweetness that makes people reach into a bowl again while saying they are definitely finished. One quirky tidbit is the popular tale that potato chips were invented in Saratoga Springs, New York, in the 19th century after a customer complained that fried potatoes were too thick. The cook, often named as George Crumb in later versions, supposedly sliced them paper thin out of irritation, only for the customer to love them. Historians treat the story with caution, because thin fried potatoes appeared in earlier recipes and the legend grew over time. Still, it is pleasing to imagine one of the world's great snack foods emerging from culinary annoyance. Petty behaviour occasionally has consequences. You step into a British fish and chip shop near evening, where windows fog and the air smells of vinegar, salt, frying batter, and rain-damp coats. The floor is worn by countless hungry feet. Potatoes arrive as thick chips, fried until their outsides are crisp and their centres soft. They are wrapped in paper, carried into cold streets, eaten with fingers that grow shiny with grease. This food belongs to industrial towns, workers' suppers, seaside walks, and late nights when dignity has gone home early. Across the Atlantic, you enter a diner where fries slide onto plates beside burgers, sandwiches, eggs, and anything else willing to share space. In Belgium and northern France, you find frites served in cones, hot and salty, with sauces. In Spain, potatoes meet spicy tomato sauce as patatas bravas. In Germany, potato salad becomes an argument disguised as a side dish, because every region knows the correct version, and everyone else is gently wrong. The potato's industrial journey does not erase local traditions. It multiplies them, packages them, exports them, and sometimes makes them alarmingly addictive. Historians still argue about the exact origins of French fries, with competing claims involving Belgium, France, and broader European frying traditions. The name itself can confuse more than it clarifies. What matters for the sleepy traveller is that frying potatoes in strips became one of the most beloved food practices on earth. National pride gathers around the fryer, which is understandable. Few flags are as persuasive as hot potatoes and salt. Beyond snacks, the potato feeds industries you may not notice at dinner. Potato starch thickens soups, sauces, puddings, and processed foods. It sizes paper and textiles. It appears in adhesives and biodegradable materials. Potatoes can be fermented into alcohol, especially vodka and other spirits in some regions, though grains and other crops are also used. In a starch factory, washed potatoes are crushed, separated, filtered, and dried. The air smells damp and mineral, with a faint raw potato scent. Machines hum. White powder drifts lightly over surfaces, making the room look as though winter has become edible. You pass a frozen food plant, where cut potatoes are blanched, dried, partly fried, frozen, bagged and shipped. Cold air spills from storage rooms and bites at your hands. This technology changes the restaurant world. Fast food chains rely on uniform frozen fries that can be cooked quickly and taste familiar across great distances. The potato becomes standardized comfort, engineered for texture, timing, color, and crunch. It is a little strange, perhaps, to see a crop born in mountain diversity become a global symbol of sameness. But humans do love convenience, especially when it comes with salt. Still, the industrial potato carries tensions. Farmers may depend on contracts, processors, variety requirements, chemical inputs, irrigation, and market prices beyond their control. Consumers enjoy cheap snacks, while health concerns rise around high-fat, high-salt diets. The potato itself is not the villain, boiled, baked, or stewed. It can be plain and nourishing, but once we slice it, fry it, salt it, and eat it by the mountain, the conversation changes. The tuber looks up from the fryer and says, quite reasonably, "I was only trying to help." Night settles over the factory district. The machine's slow. The last crates are stacked. The air outside is cool, but the smell of fried potatoes lingers like a warm memory in the street. Workers head home with tired shoulders and paper-wrapped meals. Somewhere, a child opens a packet of crisps and listens to the bright crackle inside. Somewhere else, fries slide from a basket, golden and steaming. You hold one hot chip between your fingers, its surface is crisp, its center soft, its salt sharp on your tongue. In that small bite, you taste fields, factories, oil, transport, labor, invention, legend, convenience, and pleasure. The potato has become modern without losing its old talent. It still comforts quickly, quietly, and with very little need for ceremony. You walk into a wartime kitchen where the windows are taped against shattering glass. The curtains are drawn, and the evening light has been trained to behave itself. The air smells of coal smoke, boiled vegetables, damp wool, and potatoes steaming under a chipped enamel lid. Outside, boots pass on the pavement. A bicycle bell rings once, then fades, somewhere far off. A siren tests the nerves of everyone within hearing, and the whole room seems to pause around the little pot on the stove. The potato has become a wartime companion, not glamorous, not heroic in the statue-building sense, but present. It waits in sacks, grows in allotments, appears in ration meals, fills soldiers' tins, and thickens soups when meat is scarce. War changes food by cutting roots, redirecting labour, damaging farms, controlling prices, and turning ordinary meals into calculations. In this world, the potato's old virtues return with quiet force. It is filling. It grows in small spaces. It can be stored. It does not need to cross an ocean if you can coax it from nearby soil. A mainstream historical fact is that during both world wars, many governments encouraged civilians to grow food in gardens, allotments, school grounds, parks, and spare plots. Potatoes were often important in these efforts because they provided substantial calories and could be cultivated by households with basic tools. In Britain during the Second World War, campaigns urged people to dig for food, and potatoes became central to official advice about practically nourishing meals. The phrase home front sounds grand, but often it meant muddy knees, sore backs, and someone wondering whether the slugs were also patriotic. You step into an allotment on a chilly morning. The soil is heavy, dark, and reluctant. Rows of potato plants are marked by sticks and string. A woman in a headscarf presses a spade into the ground, while a child follows with seed potatoes in a basket. Nearby, an older man leans on his fork and gives advice at a volume that suggests advice improves when nobody asks for it. The earth smells wet and metallic. Your hands grow cold around the rough wooden handle. A robin hops close, bold as a tiny inspector. In cities, these small plots matter. Lawns become vegetable beds. Flower borders surrender to cabbages and potatoes. Parks and estates are divided into growing spaces. People learn when to plant, how to earth up, how to lift the crop without spearing every tuber like a tragic little kebab. The labour is tiring, but it creates a sense of agency in a time when so much feels controlled by distant generals, ministries, and maps. Digging potatoes is not the same as stopping bombs, but it is something one can do with both hands. One quirky tidbit is that wartime cookbooks and government leaflets became surprisingly creative with potatoes. They suggested potato pastry, potato cakes, potato scones, potato soups, potato dumplings, and even ways to stretch scarce flour by mixing in mashed potato. Some recipes sound cosy, others sound like morale being held together with starch and optimism. But people tried them, because rationing made imagination necessary. A potato could impersonate several ingredients if everyone agreed not to ask too many questions. You enter a military field kitchen near the front, where canvas flaps snap in a cold wind and smoke from stoves crawls low over churned mud. The smell is strong boiled potatoes, grease, wet leather, tobacco, and metal. Men line up with mess tins, shoulders hunched, faces grey with fatigue. A cook ladles stew thickened with potatoes. The meal is not fancy, and no one pretends otherwise. But it is hot. It is real. The tin warms the hands before the food warms the body. For soldiers, potatoes may arrive fresh, dried, canned, or as part of stews and rations depending on army, period, and supply conditions. Moving food to armies is a vast hidden operation of carts, trains, ships, depots, cooks, clerks, and quartermasters who rarely receive poetic treatment but absolutely should. Battles make headlines. Supply lines decide whether men can stand upright long enough to fight them. The potato is a small item in that enormous system, yet it carries comfort in a form everyone understands. Historians still argue about how much civilian food campaigns improved nutrition compared with their value for morale and social discipline. Growing potatoes and vegetables certainly added food in many places, but the scale varied widely. Some households gained meaningful calories, others gained muddy frustration and a few heroic carrots. Governments liked these campaigns because they saved shipping space, encouraged thrift, and gave people a shared purpose. Citizens liked them when the harvest was good. When it was not, the potato patch became a private comedy with worms. In occupied and besieged regions, the potato could become a matter of desperation. You walk through a cold street where shop shelves are nearly bare and people queue with baskets. Snow softens the edges of ruined buildings. The air smells of smoke, hunger, and frozen cloth. A few potatoes in a bag are guarded carefully. Peels are saved for soup. Rotten parts are cut away. Nothing is wasted. Hunger changes the moral status of scraps. What once went to pigs may become supper, and nobody laughs at thrift when the pot is thin. Yet potatoes also offer comfort beyond calories. A baked potato held in the hands can be warmth. Mashed potatoes can make a rationed meal feel less like arithmetic. Potato soup can gather a family around one pot, while news crackles from a radio. In a kitchen during blackout, you hear the spoons scrape the bottom of a bowl, the murmur of adults keeping their voices calm, the small, sleepy complaint of a child wanting more butter when there is no more butter. The potato absorbs the mood of the room. It becomes ordinary courage, soft enough to swallow. As the war years stretch on, recipes adapt. Leftover potatoes are fried for breakfast. Cold potatoes are sliced into salads when vinegar is available. Mashed potatoes top pies when pastry is scarce. Potato water may be saved for bread or soup. Peels are scrubbed rather than discarded. The kitchen smells of steam, cabbage, onions, and the slightly scorched edge of something stretched too far. People become experts in making enough out of almost enough. That, too, is history. You stand at the edge of an evening allotment as the sky darkens. The city hums beyond the fence, muted by distance and worry. Someone lifts a forkful of earth, and a cluster of potatoes tumbles free, pale and solid in the fading light. A small cheer rises from the family gathered there, not a grand cheer, just a tired, grateful sound. The kind made by people who know that survival is often built from unremarkable victories. The potato at war is not a weapon. Though it serves armies, it is not a policy. Though governments count it, it is not a speech. Though posters praise it, it is a warm meal in a frightened house, a row of green leaves in a bomb-shadowed city, a stew ladled into cold hands, a sack in the cellar against uncertain weeks. It reminds you that history is not only made by those who command, it is also made by those who plant, peel, boil, share, and keep going. You return to the high Andes in a season of clear air and bright earth, where the mountains rise in blue, brown, and violet layers beneath a sky so wide it seems to have forgotten about ceilings entirely. The wind moves over the slopes with a dry whisper. It carries the smell of cold stone, llama dung, sun-warmed grass, and cooking smoke drifting from homes built close to the land. Under your feet, the soil is uneven, dark in some places, sandy in others, and alive with the memory of countless hands. Here, potatoes do not appear as one thing. They appear as a world, in a market spread across woven cloths. You see tubers in colours that seem almost painted for a festival deep purple, red like clay, yellow like butter, white, pink, brown, black, and speckled combinations that look as if the earth became bored with plainness. Some are round as pebbles, some are long and curved, some are knobbled like old fingers, some are tiny enough to fit 3 in your palm. The supermarket potato, bless its tidy little heart, suddenly seems like a very shy relative at a loud family gathering. A mainstream historical fact is that the Andes remain the centre of the world's greatest potato diversity. Indigenous farmers in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and nearby regions have maintained thousands of native potato varieties across different elevations, soils, and climates. This diversity is not decorative, it is practical, cultural, and ecological. Different potatoes serve different purposes. Some taste best boiled, some are better for soups, some tolerate frost, some resist certain pests, some store well, some are used for ritual exchange or special meals. And diversity is a pantry, a library, and an insurance policy all at once. You walk beside an indigenous farmer carrying a woven sack over one shoulder. The cloth brushes against his back with a dry rasp. He speaks of varieties by name, not as generic potatoes, but as familiar beings with personalities. One grows well in a cold field near the ridge. Another dislikes too much water. A third is lovely to eat but sulks during poor weather. Farmers learn these distinctions through generations of observation. The knowledge does not sit only in books, it sits in fingers, meals, planting songs, storage rooms, and stories told while sorting tubers in the evening. The field ahead is planted in a pattern that may look irregular to an outsider. It is not. Different varieties grow together, creating resilience against changing conditions. The leaves shift in the wind, a soft green rustle under the bright sun. You kneel and touch the soil. It is cool just beneath the surface, warmer where light strikes it directly. A woman digs with a hooked tool, loosening a plant. Potatoes tumble out in a bright little scatter. Children gather them, laughing when one resembles a duck or a foot, or an elderly uncle with strong opinions. The potato accepts mockery with grace. It has heard worse. One quirky tidbit is that some Andean communities hold potato beauty contests or festivals where unusual native varieties are displayed with pride. Tubers may be judged by size, colour, shape, rarity, or charm. It sounds playful, and it is, but it also honours agricultural knowledge. A strange-looking potato may represent adaptation to a specific microclimate, or a lineage preserved through careful seed saving. Beauty, in this setting, is not smoothness. Beauty is survival with character. You enter a rural kitchen where potatoes are being cooked in several ways. The room smells of smoke, herbs, wool, and steaming starch. A clay pot bubbles softly. Another batch roasts beneath ash, skins darkening and cracking. Dried chunyo waits in a basket nearby, pale and light. A woman breaks open a hot tuber and offers it to you with salt and a fresh cheese that smells faintly grassy. The inside is golden, floury, and sweet. You feel the heat through your fingertips, then the comfort of it spreading as you eat. Language holds the potato here as well. Quechua and Aymara communities have names, classifications, and farming knowledge tied to tubers, seasons, soils, and mountains. Words can distinguish traits that outsiders might miss completely. A potato variety is not just a botanical object. It belongs to a landscape, a community, and a memory. When a language weakens, some of that agricultural understanding can become harder to carry. The loss is not romantic, it is practical. It can affect what people plant, how they identify disease, when they harvest, and how they prepare food. Scholars still argue over the best ways to protect Andean potato diversity, while respecting the rights and knowledge of indigenous communities. Seed banks can preserve genetic material, and research institutions can study traits useful for global agriculture. Yet living diversity depends on farmers continuing to plant, taste, exchange, and adapt varieties in their own fields. Preservation in a cold vault is valuable, but a potato also needs festivals, markets, kitchens, jokes, children, weather, and someone willing to dig it up with muddy hands. You walk through a conservation plot where rows are marked with small signs. Scientists work with local farmers to document and protect native varieties. The atmosphere is quiet but busy. Paper tags flutter, cameras click. Soil is brushed from tubers so their colours can be recorded. Nearby, a farmer corrects a researcher's pronunciation of a variety name with gentle firmness. The exchange matters. Scientific knowledge and local knowledge can meet, but only if neither one enters the field wearing boots too large for humility. Climate change adds pressure to this ancient landscape. Warmer temperatures may push pests and diseases to higher elevations. Rainfall patterns may shift. Frosts may come at strange times. Farmers respond by moving varieties, adjusting planting dates, experimenting with fields, and drawing on the deep diversity they have inherited. The potato's future may depend on this old flexibility. It may depend on people who never stopped treating the crop as a living relationship instead of a uniform product. Evening arrives slowly, tinting the mountains with rose and ash. A herd moves across a slope, bells sounding thin and clear in the cool air. Smoke rises from scattered homes. Baskets of potatoes sit near doorways, their skins dusty, their colours muted in the fading light. You run your hand over them and feel bumps, eyes, scars, and shapes no machine would design. They're not perfect. They're better than perfect. They are particular. In this highland quiet, the potato is not a humble stranger or an industrial ingredient. It is kin to place. It carries indigenous skill, endurance, taste, humour, and memory through centuries of upheaval. The world may know the potato through fries, chips, of famine, factories, and some statistics, but here you meet its deeper self, colourful, stubborn, local, and still rooted in mountain soil. It waits in baskets as night gathers, not as a relic, but as a future with many skins. You drift into a kitchen where the window is fogged with steam, and the evening has settled gently against the glass. Outside, the street is dark and wet. Inside, the air smells of butter, onions, pepper, warm dough, and potatoes softening in a pot. The sound is domestic and sleepy water bubbling, a spoon tapping a bowl, a knife moving steadily over a cutting board. The potato has become comfort food across the world, not because it demands attention, but because it accepts almost any flavour and turns it into something that feels like home. You begin in the Andes, where potatoes still meet cheese, herbs, chilies, and earth ovens. In Peru, papa a la huancaína brings boiled potatoes beneath a creamy yellow sauce made with cheese and ají pepper, bright and rich against the plain tuber. In another meal, potatoes may sit beside roasted meats, corn, or fresh herbs, warmed from the pot and dusted with salt. The potato here is not a blank background. It carries memory, altitude, and local pride. Each bite has the taste of soil, smoke, and long practice. A mainstream historical fact is that potatoes have become one of the world's most widely eaten crops, adapted into countless national, regional, and household cuisines. They appear in soups, stews, dumplings, breads, pancakes, curries, salads, casseroles, fried snacks, and festive dishes. Their global success comes partly from their flexibility. They can be boiled, baked, mashed, fried, dried, grated, fermented, roasted, steamed, stuffed, or turned into flour and starch. Honestly, for something that spends most of its life underground, the potato has a very impressive social calendar. You walk into a Polish kitchen in winter. Snow presses softly against the window, and the room smells of flour, sour cream, fried onions, and potatoes mashed until smooth. Hands roll dough for pierogi, filling each small half-moon with potato and cheese. The dumplings slip into boiling water and rise when ready, plump and pale. Then they meet butter and onions in a pan, where they sizzle quietly. The first bite is tender, warm, and slightly tangy. The kind of food that tells the cold outside to wait its turn. In Germany, you find potato salad taking many forms, because apparently one potato dish can support an entire philosophy department. Some versions are warm with vinegar, mustard, broth, and onions. Others are creamy with mayonnaise, herbs, pickles, or eggs. In Switzerland, Rosti turns grated potatoes into a crisp golden cake, soft inside and crunchy at the edges. In Spain, tortilla de patatas folds sliced potatoes into eggs and oil, making something simple enough for a family table and dignified enough for a bar counter. The potato keeps changing costume, but the warmth remains familiar. One quirky tidbit is that in parts of Europe, potato dumplings can be so culturally serious that their texture inspires passionate debate. Too dense, and someone sighs as though civilization has declined. Too soft, and someone else blames modern life. Food traditions often hide deep emotion inside small technical preferences. A dumpling is never only a dumpling when grandmother made it differently. You move eastward into kitchens filled with garlic, dill, cabbage, mushrooms, and sour cream. In Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and neighbouring regions, grated potatoes become pancakes fried until crisp, sometimes served with cream or applesauce. In Russia, potatoes slip into soups, salads, and pies. In Jewish kitchens of Eastern Europe and beyond, latkes bring grated potato, onion, and hot oil into a crisp celebration of patience, faith, and the noble art of not burning your fingers while eating too soon. Historians still debate how certain potato dishes developed across borders, especially in regions where empires shifted, communities migrated, and recipes moved through households rather than official records. Was one dumpling tradition borrowed, adapted, or invented in several places at once because everyone had potatoes, flour, hunger, and common sense? The answer is often tangled. Kitchens do not stamp passports. They borrow, improve, forget, rename, and carry on. You enter an Indian street market at dusk, where the air is alive with cumin, chili, frying oil, coriander, dust, and rain still rising from warm pavement. A vendor presses spiced mashed potato into patties, browning them on a hot griddle until their edges crisp. Another stuffs potatoes into samosas, folding triangles of dough that puff and blister in oil. In a South Indian dosa stall, masala potatoes are tucked into a thin golden crepe with mustard seeds, curry leaves, and turmeric. The potato becomes soft heat, bright colour, and comfort wrapped in spice. In East Asia, it changes again. In China, shredded potato stir-fried with vinegar and chili stays crisp and sharp. Nothing like the heavy mash many outsiders expect. Potato slices simmer in stews with beef, peppers, or eggplant. In Korea, gamjajorim turns potatoes glossy in soy sauce and sweetness. Tender, but firm. Served as a small side dish that somehow disappears faster than anyone admits. In Japan, nikujaga brings potatoes, meat, onions, and soy-sweet broth into a gentle home dish associated with family kitchens and quiet evenings. You cross to Africa, where potatoes join stews, curries, street foods, and highland farming traditions. In Kenya, potatoes appear in irio, mashed with peas, maize, and greens, forming a soft green gold comfort that smells of earth and vegetables. In Ethiopia, potatoes may enter spiced vegetable stews. In North Africa, they sit in tagines, soaking up saffron, cumin, preserved lemon, and meat juices. The potato is not always the star. Often it is the patient guest who absorbs the room's best stories. Across the Americas, it keeps multiplying into new forms. In the United States, mashed potatoes appear at holiday tables with gravy, baked potatoes split open with butter, and hash browns crisping on diner grills. In Canada, fries meet cheese curds and gravy as poutine, a dish that sounds like a dare and eats like a blanket. In Latin America, potatoes join soups, stews, empanada fillings, and street snacks, shaped by indigenous roots, European influence, African traditions, and local invention. Night deepens, and you sit at a table with a bowl warming your hands. The potato inside may be mashed, curried, fried, simmered, stuffed, or folded into dough. But its comfort comes from something constant. It is soft enough for tired mouths, filling enough for uncertain days, plain enough to welcome other flavours, and humble enough to belong to both feast and leftover supper. The world has taken the potato and made it intimate. Not one global food, but many private homes. A spoon scrapes a bowl. Oil crackles in a pan. Steam rises from a dumpling. Salt clings to warm fingers. In every version, the potato becomes local again, carrying the quiet promise that ordinary food, made with care, can feel like a small shelter from the weather. You stand in a test field under a sky that cannot quite decide what season it is. The morning begins cool, with mist lying low over the rows, but by midday the sun presses down with a dry, flat heat that makes the leaves hang tiredly. The air smells of dust, warm soil, irrigation water, and the faint green bitterness of stressed plants. A hose clicks somewhere, releasing a thin spray that darkens the ground for a moment before the thirsty earth drinks it away. The potato is facing the future now, and the future is not especially polite. This crop has always been good at difficult places. It can grow in cool uplands, in small plots, in soils where other staples struggle, and in short seasons that leave little room for laziness. Yet climate change complicates the old agreement between farmer and field. Heat waves arrive at strange times, rain comes too hard, too late, or not at all. New pests move into regions where winters once kept them away. Diseases find fresh opportunities. The potato remains resilient. But resilience is not the same as invincibility. Even a stubborn tuber has limits. A mainstream historical fact is that potatoes are sensitive to high temperatures, especially during tuber formation. When soil and air grow too warm, plants may produce fewer or smaller tubers, and quality can decline. Water stress can also reduce yields. In many regions, farmers are already adjusting planting dates, irrigation practices, storage systems, and variety choices to cope with shifting weather. The potato is no longer only a crop of tradition, it is a crop of adaptation. You walk beside a farmer in a dryland region where the soil cracks lightly between rows. He kneels and presses his fingers into the earth, testing moisture by touch. His hands are rough, his fingernails dark with soil. The plants are alive, but their leaves have curled slightly, conserving what they can. A breeze moves across the field, carrying dust against your face. The farmer says little. Farmers often know when speech would only irritate the weather. He looks toward clouds gathering too far away and waits to see whether they are generous or merely decorative. In another place, water comes too fiercely. You step into a low field after days of heavy rain. Mud pulls at your boots. The air smells sour and wet, with a hint of rot from leaves pressed against the ground. Potato plants dislike waterlogged soil because their roots need air, and tubers can rot if conditions stay too wet. A field can suffer from drought one year and flood in the next, because climate instability has a gift for variety that nobody requested. The farmer lifts a plant and shakes mud from the roots, frowning at what the water has hidden. One quirky tidbit is that scientists have explored growing potatoes in extremely controlled environments, including experiments connected to space research. The potato has been tested in growth chambers and unusual soils because it produces edible calories efficiently and can be propagated from tubers or true seed. This does not mean your next baked potato is coming from Mars, despite what a dramatic headline might suggest. But it does show how often humans return to the same question when conditions are difficult. Can the potato help? You enter a modern breeding station where rows of trial potatoes stretch beneath netting. The atmosphere is quiet but tense in the way experimental fields can be. Each row carries a different hope drought tolerance, heat tolerance, blight resistance, better storage, faster maturity, improved nutrition. Researchers move slowly, taking notes on tablets and paper. The sound is soft leaves brushed by sleeves, plastic labels tapping in the wind, soil crumbling from lifted roots. A plant that looks ordinary may carry a trait that matters deeply to farmers facing unstable seasons. Historians and agricultural experts still argue over how much the potato can contribute to future food security compared with other crops, and under what conditions. Some emphasize its high productivity, nutritional value, and ability to grow in diverse environments. Others warn that without fair access to land, water, seed, storage, and markets, no crop can solve hunger by itself. The potato can be part of survival, but it cannot repair inequality with a cheerful little sprout. That would be convenient, and history is rarely that convenient. You visit a seed storage facility where the air is cool and controlled. Shelves hold labelled samples, small tubers, tissue cultures, and seeds from cultivated and wild relatives. The smell is clean, faintly earthy, and cold. This is a quiet kind of insurance. Genetic diversity may help breeders find traits needed for future climates' resistance to emerging diseases, tolerance of heat, survival in poor soils, or adaptation to shorter growing seasons. A wild potato that looks unimpressive in a remote valley may one day help protect harvests far away. Humility, apparently, can be genetic. In a crowded city market, the future has a different smell: diesel smoke, ripe fruit, plastic sacks, frying oil, and human urgency. Potatoes are piled beside onions, chilies, rice, beans, and greens. Buyers ask prices with careful faces. For poor households, the potato can still offer affordable calories, but price shocks, transport disruptions, fuel costs, and extreme weather can turn a familiar food into a burden. Food security is not only about what grows, it is about whether people can reach it, buy it, cook it, and store it safely. You touch a potato in the market pile, or it is warm from the day, dusty, and firm. Around you, the world is louder than any field motorbikes, bargaining voices, music from a phone, a vendor laughing, rain beginning suddenly on a tin roof. The potato has travelled from a farm to a truck to a stall to a kitchen not yet known. Its journey depends on roads, labour, money, weather, and trust. A crop that once seemed simple now reveals a whole chain of fragile connections. As evening settles over the test field, the heat softens at last. The plants lift slightly in the cooling air, insects begin their thin chorus. The soil releases a warm, mineral smell. You crouch and lift a plant from one trial row. Beneath it are several small tubers, dusty and pale, not abundant, but alive. The researcher beside you weighs them, notes the number, and places them in a labelled bag. It is not dramatic, it is careful. The future often begins in careful work that looks boring to anyone who has never been hungry. The potato's next great story may not be conquest, empire, famine, or factory food. It may be adjustment, moving planting dates, saving old varieties, breeding new ones, sharing seed fairly, protecting water, helping farmers who know their land best, reducing waste, making sure comfort food does not depend on exhausted soil and invisible labour. Night comes gently across the field. The irrigation line gives one last ticking sigh. Your hands smell of soil. The potato rests beneath the cooling surface, still doing what it has always done, turning light, water, earth, and human attention into food. The world around it is changing quickly, but under the dark ground there remains a small stubborn promise, not a guarantee, not a miracle, a promise that survival is still possible when knowledge, care, and patience are planted together. You sit in a quiet kitchen at the edge of night, holding a warm potato in both hands. Its skin is rough, thin, and slightly dusty, with small eyes scattered across its surface like sleepy stars. Steam rises where it is split open, carrying the gentle smell of earth, salt, and heat. Outside, the world is dark. Inside, the room is soft with lamplight. The table worn smooth by years of meals, elbows, letters, bills, and ordinary conversations that history rarely bothers to record. The potato rests there, plain as a stone and far more generous. It does not look like a crop that changed the world. It looks like something that rolled from a sack and quietly accepted its fate. Yet in its patient roundness, you can feel the weight of mountains, ships, gardens, armies, markets, famines, kitchens, laboratories, festivals, and fields. It has been feared, praised, taxed, stolen, studied, fried, mashed, worshipped in jokes, blamed in tragedy, and loved most deeply when nobody made a speech about it. A mainstream historical fact is that the potato became one of the most important food crops on Earth, helping feed populations across continents after its origins in the Andes. It reshaped agriculture in Europe, supported population growth in some regions, entered Asian and African farming systems, became central to industrial food, and still remains a major global source of calories. It is not the only world-changing crop. Of course, rice, wheat, maize, cassava, barley, sorghum, and many others deserve their own soft pillows and respectful bedtime stories. But the potato's path is unusually dramatic for something that spends its best years underground. You place it on a plate and watch butter melt into the split centre. The butter slides slowly into the soft flesh, shining gold in the lamplight. A little salt falls like fine frost. The first bite is simple, almost humble, but not empty. It is warm, dense, and soothing. It asks very little of you. That is part of its genius. The potato can be a survival ration, a feast dish, a street snack, a farmer's hope, a scientist's sample, a child's comfort, or a late-night meal for someone too tired to cook properly, but still determined to be civilized. One quirky tidbit is that the potato has inspired museums, festivals, songs, mascots, school science projects, novelty postcards, and competitive displays of record-breaking tubers. Humans, given enough time with any useful plant, will eventually put it on a banner, dress someone in a costume, and call it culture. This is not a criticism, it is one of our sweeter habits. We turn food into memory, and then memory into celebration. You walk through an imaginary harvest festival where tables are covered with potatoes of every size and colour. Children run between stalls. Someone plays music near a tent smelling of fried cakes and damp wool. Farmers compare yields with the careful politeness of people absolutely measuring themselves against one another. A giant potato sits on display, admired like a minor royal. Nearby, smaller native varieties shine in baskets, purple, yellow, red, and speckled. Each one carrying a different story of soil, altitude, taste, and survival. The potato's legacy is not innocent. No crop's legacy is. It fed empires and armies. It helped sustain unjust systems. Its failure exposed cruelty and neglect. Its industrial forms have shaped diets in ways that bring both pleasure and concern. Its modern cultivation can depend on water, chemicals, markets, and labour arrangements that deserve attention. The potato is not a saint, it is a crop, and crops enter human systems with all our brilliance and foolishness attached. Historians still argue whether the potato should be seen mainly as a liberating food, a tool of population growth, a crop of empire, a symbol of vulnerability, or simply one part of a larger agricultural transformation. The answer depends on where you stand. In one field, it is security; in another, dependence; in one kitchen, comfort; in another, memory of hunger; in one laboratory, genetic possibility; in one fast food box, salty pleasure. The potato does not carry one meaning, it carries many, and all of them have dirt on their shoes. You step outside into a small garden where potato plants grow under moonlight. Their leaves are dark, almost silver at the edges. The night air is cool against your face and smells of wet soil, grass, and distant rain. When you kneel and press your hand into the ground, the soil gives way softly. Somewhere beneath the surface, tubers are swelling in silence. No announcement, no applause, just growth in the dark. That hiddenness is part of the potato's quiet wisdom. So much of life happens below notice. Roots take hold, food forms, families endure, knowledge passes from hand to hand, a farmer saves seed, a cook stretches supper, a migrant carries a recipe, a scientist labels a sample. A child learns that hot potatoes must be opened carefully unless one enjoys burning one's fingers, which most of us apparently need to learn personally. The crop that changed the world did so by being ordinary enough to enter ordinary lives. It did not remain in palaces, laboratories, or trade ledgers. It moved into the daily rhythm of chopping, boiling, planting, lifting, storing, peeling, sharing. It became part of hands. That is why its history feels so intimate. You can hold it. You can smell it. You can eat it with salt. It is world history at the scale of a palm. In the quiet kitchen, the last steam thins above the plate. The potato cools slowly, softening into the evening. You hear the low hum of the room, the small settling sounds of the wooden walls, perhaps rain beginning beyond the window. The story of the potato is vast, but it ends, as food stories often do, with warmth. A crop from cold mountains becomes comfort in countless homes. A hidden tuber becomes a thread connecting farmers, sailors, monks, kings, Migrants, workers, scientists, cooks, and sleepy listeners. And now the field grows still. The ridges rest under moonlight, and the leaves no longer tremble. The soil holds its darkness kindly. Somewhere far away, a hearth glows low, and a pot cools beside the fire. The mountains breathe in silence. The sea moves softly in its sleep. Kitchens empty, markets close, cellars darken, and the small round shapes of stored potatoes wait without hurry. You do not need to follow them any farther tonight. Let the warmth fade gently from your hands. Let the old roads blur, the terraces soften, the ships drift beyond the edge of thought. The world is large, but for this moment it can be as simple as earth, rain, fire, and food. Breathe slowly, rest deeply. The humble potato has done its work, and so have you.